The latest threat to the Mir space station comes from the ground. A Proton rocket carrying a military satellite exploded shortly after takeoff in Kazakhstan. Now the Kazakhs won't allow the Russians to send up any more rockets until the mess is cleaned up.
Poisonous fuel leaked into the rivers and lakes. We still don't know how large of an area is contaminated.
The holdup threatens the launch of a Soyuz rocket next week that was supposed to bring food and water to the 2 Russians and 1 Frenchman currently on board the Mir. Without resupplies, they would have to abandon the space station, perhaps as early as July 17th.
I think a solution will be found, and we will launch more Proton rockets from Kazakh territory. It's in their financial interest, too.
Russia lost control over the Baikonur Space Center when Kazakhstan became an independent country in 1991. Since then, the Russians have leased the Cosmodrome, but they owe the Kazakhs more than $100 million in back rent. After surviving a fire, a collision, and numerous computer failures, it could be a cash shortage that finally grounds the Mir. Steve Harrigan, CNN, Moscow.
Seit einigen Tagen Luft. Für die 3 Kosmonauten bestehe derzeit aber keine Gefahr. Der Druckabfall sei nur gering und es befinde sich genug Sauerstoff an Bord. Ursache ist offenbar ein undichtes Ventil. Planmäßig ist die Rückkehr der Mannschaft für den nächsten Monat vorgesehen.
A setback for the Russian space program this past week. A Proton rocket carrying a satellite crashed to Earth in Kazakhstan shortly after takeoff on Monday. Debris landed in a sparsely populated area. There were no reports of injuries, but officials worried about fuel or other toxic substances that might have spilled. Kazakhstan suspended all launches from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, the main launch base for Russian spacecraft, while the crash was investigated.
1,5 Stunden planmäßig hebt die Soyuz-Rakete ab und markiert das vorläufige Ende eines Streits zwischen Kasachstan und Russland. Denn seit dem Zerfall der Sowjetunion untersteht die Raumfahrtbehörde Russland, der zugehörige Weltraumbahnhof aber liegt auf kasachischem Gebiet. Hier Bilder aus dem Kontrollzentrum bei Moskau. Die Kasachen verlangen für die Nutzung des Geländes in Baikonur Pacht. Geld, das die Russen nie gezahlt haben, denn Kasachstan, so heißt es, würde seine Schulden in Moskau ja auch nicht begleichen. Als Anfang des Monats eine russische Rakete kurz nach dem Start über der kasachischen Steppe abstürzte, war für Kasachstan das Maß voll. Mit sofortiger Wirkung verbot das Land den Russen alle Raketenstarts. Offizielle Begründung: weite Steppengebiete seien durch giftige Trümmerteile verseucht. Teile der Rakete waren außerdem auf ein Dorf gefallen. Kasachstan verlangte Schadensersatz. Erst vor wenigen Tagen lenkte Russland ein, bis zum Jahresende soll nun ein Großteil der ausstehenden Pacht gezahlt werden. Die Kasachen hoben das Startverbot auf. Die Raumstation Mir wird bald verschrottet. Doch noch tut die letzte Besatzung hier Dienst, 2 Russen und ein Franzose. Die 3 Männer können aufatmen. Der drohende Versorgungsengpass ist vorerst abgewendet.
Progress supply ship blasted off Friday night from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, just 2 days after Russia resolved the dispute over the use of the site. Kazakh officials had banned Russian launches after a Proton booster rocket exploded after takeoff. The new supply ship is carrying food, fuel and equipment to the 3-man crew. It's supposed to be the last crew aboard Mir.
On Saturday, a rocket blasted off from the Baikonur launch site in the former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan. On board, a research satellite headed for orbit. This is the 2nd launch in just as many days. Friday, a supply ship took off from the same Cosmodrome carrying food, fuel, and equipment to the 3-man crew still aboard the Mir space station. No other crews are expected to be deployed to Mir. Friday's and Saturday's launches occurred soon after Russia resolved a dispute over the use of the Baikonur site. Officials in Kazakhstan had banned Russian launches after a Proton booster rocket exploded after takeoff.
Schweben und sich ganz gemütlich fühlen.
Wie lange hat Ihre Ausbildung gedauert?
Zum Astronauten gute 2 Jahre, sagen wir mal, bis man also für einen Flug, für eine Mission, wie wir das nennen, fertig ist.
Und jetzt machen Anna und Max selbst den Astronautentest.
So, Max und Anna, jetzt seht ihr hier die Zentrifuge und hier kann man sich reinsetzen und dann werdet ihr gedreht mit dem Zweifachen eures Körpergewichtes. So, wer will als Erster?
Ladies first.
Ladies first. über die Anna schaust auf dem Bildschirm, da siehst du so eine ein bisschen zackig aussehende Kurve. Das ist die Herzstromkurve von der Anna. Na?
Ja.
So, dann können wir, glaube ich, mal anfangen. Da fahren wir erstmal den Motor hoch. Und jetzt fängt es schon an zu drehen.
Ja, ich spüre es wohl.
Wie geht's dir, Anna?
Mir geht's gut.
Und jetzt ist Max dran.
Oh, da wird einem schlecht.
Sollen wir aufhören, Max?
Ja.
Aufhören, stopp.
Nee, warte. Da muss man sich erst daran gewöhnen, ey, wenn man da volle Dröhnung durch die Luft geschleudert wird, ey.
Und jetzt ist es vorbei.
Oh, Wahnsinn. Muss man erleben.
Also ich muss ganz ehrlich sagen, das kann ich nicht jedem empfehlen und nach dieser Fahrt habe ich eigentlich beschlossen, nicht Astronaut zu werden.
Von außen sieht das harmlos aus, von innen ist es ganz anders.
Wow, ist das stark.
Guck mal, Anna, korrekt, es gibt sogar Smarties im Weltraum.
Wer glaubt, es gibt nur Suppe?
Da hat man das ganze Wasser rausgenommen. Damit spart man Transportgewicht und es wird haltbarer. Kannst du Russisch?
Nee.
Dann sage ich dir, es ist also Erbspüree in Milchbrei. Klingt toll, ne?
Lecker.
Es ist ja ganz schwer auf der Erde, den Zustand der Schwerelosigkeit einmal zu erleben. Und damit man jetzt das Gefühl hat, wie es denn ist, auf dem Kopf zu stehen oder sich in allen Bewegungsrichtungen einmal zu bewegen, gibt es hier dieses Trainingsgerät. Übrigens, Tauchen ist auch ganz ähnlich. Wenn man viel taucht, kriegt man auch so ein Gefühl für Schwerelosigkeit.
Können Sie mal erzählen, wie Ihre Ausbildung aussieht? Also so zum Astronauten?
Jetzt gerade um diese Experimente im All zu machen, sucht man Wissenschaftler. Ein abgeschlossenes Studium, das ist schon mal die Voraussetzung. Dann muss man warten, bis eine Organisation mal Astronauten sucht. In Europa ist das die Europäische Weltraumorganisation ESA. Und dann schnell den Brief in den Kasten und sich bewerben. Ein bisschen Glück ist dabei, aber sehr viel auch sportliche Einstellung. Und wenn man dann alles geschafft hat, dann hat man eine echte Chance, hier zum Beispiel an Bord der Internationalen Raumstation auch mit vielen, vielen anderen Astronauten zusammen Experimente zu machen. Ich drücke euch jedenfalls die Daumen.
Also wir haben heute ganz viel gesehen und gelernt.
Wir wussten ja auch eigentlich nicht, was uns erwartet und ich glaube, es schafft auch nicht jeder, sowas zu können. Aber probieren sollte es man auf alle Fälle.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. Na dann, guten Flug.
Kommandant Afanassjew und Bordingenieur Avdejew einen Weltraumspaziergang unternehmen. Beide mussten jedoch nach 6 Stunden unverrichteter Dinge in die Station zurückkehren. Ganz umsonst war der Ausflug dennoch nicht. Beide holten wissenschaftliche Ausrüstung an Bord, die an der Außenwand der Station angebracht war, und bargen ein Messgerät, das die Abgase der Mir misst. Ein neuer Versuch, die Antenne zu entfalten, soll am Dienstag stattfinden.
And what could be the last spacewalk ever conducted from Mir. In keeping with the aging space station's reputation for troubled technology, the mission was primarily a repair job. The problem was an antenna that was supposed to be deployed during a spacewalk Friday. Cosmonauts tried tugging and kicking it open with no luck. Then, Wednesday, they adjusted its power cables, and it worked just right. The 2 Russians and 1 Frenchman aboard are to leave the station next month. A final crew is due to visit next year to lower Mir's orbit and then abandon it.
Arbeitseinsatz im All. Im zweiten Anlauf gelang es 2 russischen Kosmonauten der Raumstation Mir, eine Antenne mit einem Durchmesser von 7 Metern aufzuklappen. Ein erster Versuch am Freitag war fehlgeschlagen. Es war der 73. und letzte Arbeitseinsatz außerhalb der mehr als 13 Jahre alten russischen Station. In genau einem Monat soll die derzeitige Mannschaft, 2 Russen und ein Franzose, zur Erde zurückkehren. Danach wird die Mir ferngesteuert durchs All fliegen.
Joining us now to talk about Mir's final months is Christian Feichstinger of the European Space Agency in Russia. Mr. Feichstinger, there is a crew aboard Mir. They are to be there until Saturday. Then what happens?
Good evening from Moscow. According to present plans, this last Mir crew will come down to Earth on Saturday early morning. And this return will actually mark the beginning of a new era of orbital operation of the Mir station, a new operational phase, its unmanned operational phase, which is technically, of course, a new challenge.
You say it's an unmanned operational phase. Is it to stay up there and operate? We're told the Russians are bringing it down.
Yes, according to present plans, there will be another astronaut crew visiting the Mir station beginning next year for a short time period in order to prepare the station for, finally prepare the station for its controlled destructive re-entry into the atmosphere, which will then, should take place beginning of next year, somewhere between February and April.
How much of it will be destroyed in re-entry? How much of it is actually going to return to Earth, and where?
Well, it's very difficult to say how much will really come down to Earth. Similar to the re-entry of every other Progress cargo supply ship in the past, Mir will be deorbited in a way that parts which will not burn up in the atmosphere will fall down in the southern Pacific Ocean in an area free of commercial airline routes and shipping traffic.
How dangerous is that? How much chance is there that the portions of Mir that return will not go where they're targeted?
As long as the re-entry and the destructive re-entry will be performed in a controlled way, any risks should be negligible.
Christian Feichtinger, thanks very much for this. Vanilla?
It has circled the Earth more than 70,000 times, in orbit for 13.5 years, more than twice as long as its inventors dreamed. It's had moments of triumph and brushes with disaster. Now its life in space is almost over. Russia can't afford to keep the Mir orbiting, especially when Moscow has to find the rubles to build major components of the new International Space Station.
There are financial problems. They exist today. They existed yesterday. And we have every reason to believe they'll exist tomorrow.
So the current three-man crew, 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 Frenchman, will bid the Mir farewell, close the hatch, and return to Earth in their Soyuz TM spaceship. Special equipment is supposed to keep the empty Mir circling the globe until February or March of next year, when it will be thrust into a lower orbit and ultimately, hopefully, drown in the Pacific Ocean. There is a slight possibility another crew could visit the Mir just before it's sent to its watery grave to turn out the lights for good. There's even a possibility an actor could be sent up to shoot a few scenes aboard. The end of the Mir is a real blow to the country that invented space stations. Even when things went wrong on Mir, it taught invaluable lessons. Computers broke down, cooling systems leaked, a fire broke out. But crews rolled up their sleeves and fixed it.
We never tested in real flight, and no one would allow to do this. But accidentally, after many years of flight, it happens on board Mir. So we are going to use this experience in next space station also.
The crew has packed up much of the computer equipment and scientific experiments, which they'll bring back to Earth. Flight Commander Viktor Afanasyev says right now all the equipment aboard is in working order. But he cautions he wouldn't want to leave the station vacant in space for too long. Absolute technical reliability, he says, is impossible to achieve. And with the aging space station's history of glitches, no one can guarantee there won't be more.
And Jill Doherty joins us now by phone from Mission Control outside Moscow. Jill, what's happening there now?
Well, Sonia, we're just standing by now because any minute now the crew, that three-man crew, will be actually leaving and shutting the hatch behind them and getting ready to board their Soyuz space capsule and go back to Earth. So it's a poignant moment. You know, here at the Space Center, obviously there are a lot of Russian officials and people who have participated in the program. There are some cosmonauts, too. But there are also a lot of French people, and there's a mixture, I'd say, of excitement and a lot of sadness, especially among the Russians, that this program is coming to an end. After all, it's really the symbol, one of the symbols of the Russian space program. It's really one of the last things that Russians have done on their own. Now they'll, of course, be part of the International Space Station. But there's a lot of pride. with all the problems that the Mir had, there's still a lot of pride. And in fact, I asked one woman who has worked here for quite a long time how she felt, and she said she was probably going to cry along with a lot of other people. Sonia?
Jill, we just want to bring in here, we have our guest, Marsha Smith, who's an analyst on telecommunications policy analysis. Stay with us, Jill, while we're waiting for that. Marsha, what are Mir's achievements?
Well, the space station, of course, has been up for 13 years, which is an achievement in and of itself. And I think that one of the things that Russia can be most proud of is its whole long history with space stations. They've been operating space stations since 1971. This is their 7th successful space station. They've really demonstrated how you can keep a space apparatus in orbit, working, functioning, supporting crews for that period of time.
And in terms, would their expertise be invaluable for the new International Space Station?
Absolutely. What they've learned in trying to operate Mir for so long will help NASA and the other countries participating in ISS trying to keep ISS up.
Okay, Jill, just take us through the specific timetable we have today in the next hours as they close down, close the door, undock, and make it back to Earth.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, in just a few minutes, they'll be actually closing the hatch. And then they will be, about 3 hours later, they actually undock the Soyuz from the Mir and then head on back to Earth. They'll be landing the spaceship in Kazakhstan. Of course, that's where they have blasted off many times before. And essentially, it's pretty simple. They're closing it up. They've already packed a lot of important equipment that they wanted to salvage, and also scientific information and experimental information that they have been collecting. Excuse me, that will be coming back to Earth with them. So that's already packed, and essentially it will now be on a type of remote control. There has been a little bit of concern that that would work well. In fact, the commander did say that, as I said in my package, that he wouldn't want to have that up there for very long. But the plan is, in about 6 months or so, another crew will go up and essentially get it ready to be brought back to Earth. Even at this last moment, there are, I have to tell you, some Russians here from the space program who believe in miracles. And they say, well, maybe as people see this one farewell, they'll come up with the money. But that, of course, is very, very dubious. So it really is a farewell, perhaps a temporary farewell right now, but definitely in the early spring, late winter, it will be the final farewell to Mir.
But Jill, why haven't they made the decision to let this crew be the one who makes the final farewell and prepares it to return to burn up and fall back to Earth?
Well, they've been paid. Actually, the Russian government has had money from various countries who have paid to go up to the Mir. After all, it is a great experience in preparing for the International Space Station and living. There we see now, live picture, and the two cosmonauts and the French astronaut cosmonaut. Let's listen.
We're expecting a farewell statements from Mir, are we not, Jill? If the live pictures work, we're expecting the farewell statements there of the two cosmonauts and the French cosmonaut up there with them, the one of whom has the longest record of ever being up in space. Let's see if we can hear them now.
And I anticipate the future arrival of other crews to renew the work that we've been doing here. The station that we shall leave soon in our Soyuz vehicle will be left in excellent condition. And will be available to all who wish to work here in the future and will be available with the best of conditions.
Je voudrais remercier tous ceux qui ont fait en sorte que ce vol ait lieu dans des conditions au départ un petit peu difficiles. Et tous ceux qui ont participé à ce vol. Je crois que nous avons fait un bon morceau de travail. Nous n'avons rien à regretter d'avoir assisté de faire cette aventure, car c'est probablement un des vols pour lesquels on aura réuni le plus de résultats et le plus d'expérience. Je voudrais remercier tout particulièrement l'équipe projet, l'équipe du CNES, qui m'a permis moi-même de vivre un moment de magie extraordinaire et qui va me permettre, dans la nouvelle direction où je vais aller avec l'ODI, c'est-à-dire l'Agence spatiale européenne, de profiter de tout cet acquis et d'en faire profiter de préférence, dans le cadre de la station internationale, mes camarades astronautes de l'Agence spatiale. Merci à tous. Je vous souhaite de concrétiser dans l'avenir tout ce que vous avez réussi à réunir à l'occasion de ce vol. Et à bientôt sur Terre. Au revoir. Хочу всем, кто непосредственно или косвенно участвовал в нашей программе.
I'd like to thank everyone who participated in our program. All of the best. The crew of the Mir wishes you all the best and thanks.
They're leaving the Mir. You're watching the cosmonauts, Commander Viktor Afanasyev and Flight Engineer Sergei Avdeyev, and also the French cosmonaut Jean-Pierre Egner, as they leave the Mir. The image sometimes sketchy, but it is live. You're watching the final crew, the commander there, the final full-time crew of Mir, after 13 years, leaving that space station on its own. They will be closing the hatch any moment now, and they have retreated to the Soyuz capsule that should bring them back to Earth in a few hours' time. You heard their statements as they thanked all those who had been involved in the mission. Marshall Smith, sad moment.
Well, it could be a sad moment if one wanted to look at it that way, but actually I think it would be a very proud moment for the Russians, for all that they have accomplished. And of course, it's not 100% certain that this is the last crew aboard Mir. The Russians are holding open the option of sending somebody up back in the February-March timeframe to prepare it for its final descent. And
unless they get more money, how much does it cost to keep up there?
Well, there are a lot of numbers that are floating around. The last number that the Russians had put out was about $250 million a year, but that seems a little high based on what they've been saying in the past.
So the way to look at this is closing a chapter and moving on to the International Space Station.
Precisely. I think if the Russians had had it their way, they would have been able to move directly over to the ISS and not had this period in between when there were no Russian cosmonauts in orbit, but it didn't work out that way.
Okay, Marcia Smith with the Congressional Research Service. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me.
As we watch the live images of the departure from Mir. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more World News from Washington.
Crew of the Mir wishes you all the best, and thanks.
He also said, quote, "We are abandoning a piece of Russia, and it's unclear what we'll build next." Despite all its problems in recent years, Mir maintains a pulse. CNN space correspondent Miles O'Brien recalls the space station's scientific and diplomatic achievements.
It is the little space station that could and did. But now, 13 and a half years after its first piece took flight, the seemingly unsinkable Mir is headed for a watery grave. Hapless as it often appeared, in its twilight, there is high praise for this irrepressible outpost on the high frontier.
Mir's design was very successful, I believe, and it allowed Mir to be easy maintainable. So if something failed, it could be easily fixed and changed on Mir. And I think it's good kind of test bed for future space flights.
During cosmonaut Sergei Krikolev's second stay aboard Mir, the country that sent him there did not exist when he returned. The fall of the Soviet Union was hard on the once proud Russian space program, laying the groundwork for an astounding partnership with the U.S. It led to a series of 8 shuttle dockings and 7 U.S. visitors to Mir from 1995 through 98. They were eventful years. Computers, cooling, and air purification systems failed, and in 1997, some high drama as the crew fought a fire and watched as a wayward supply ship struck and punctured a science module. Mir's days seemed numbered then.
You can only modify something so many times. You can only repair it using C-clamps and whatever you can take up to the Mir so many times. And then you're much better off coming back and building a whole new system.
Which is precisely what the U.S. and the Russians are doing. But the embryonic International Space Station is not scheduled to be occupied by a joint Russian-American crew until April of next year. If the Russians had their way, they would keep Mir occupied until then, maintaining a continuous presence in space, now nearly 10 years. But in reality, Mir's scientific prowess is no longer up to snuff. Still, even as the current crew prepares to seal the hatch and say "Do svidaniya," there is talk yet another crew may fly to Mir. One more mission to turn out the lights before the station plunges into the Pacific next year. Miles O'Brien, CNN.
Mir-Besatzung hat die russische Raumstation jetzt verlassen und wird morgen auf der Erde zurückerwartet. Die beiden Russen sowie ihr französischer Kollege stiegen in die Sojus-Raumkapsel TM-29 und verschlossen die Luke zur Mir. Die Mir wird damit nach mehr als 13 Jahren als Geisterschiff die Erde umrunden. Im kommenden Jahr soll sie aller Voraussicht nach im Pazifik versenkt werden.
Running on empty, the last resident crew of the Mir space station heads home, and the vessel, which once symbolized Soviet achievement, spends its last months of life as just another cash-strapped Russian retiree. Hello and welcome. The final ceremony just a short time ago was low-key. A few minutes of flickering images and proud words from the 2 cosmonauts and 1 Frenchman who were the last of more than 100 people to call the Russian space station home. They are now in the Soyuz capsule, preparing to leave, and it's not clear if there will ever be enough money in Russia to send anyone else, even a crew, just to fully close Mir down. What began 13 years ago as a proud adventure in space ends in a humbling kind of penury. So maybe a low-key ceremony was best. We begin our look at Mir with this report from CNN space correspondent Miles O'Brien.
It is the little space station that could and did. But now, 13 and a half years after its first piece took flight, the seemingly unsinkable Mir is headed for a watery grave. Hapless as it often appeared, in its twilight, there is high praise for this irrepressible outpost on the high frontier.
Mir's design was very successful, I believe, and it allowed Mir to be easy maintainable. So if something failed, it could be easily fixed and changed on Mir. And I think it's good kind of test bed for future space flights.
During cosmonaut Sergei Krikolev's second stay aboard Mir, the country that sent him there did not exist when he returned. The fall of the Soviet Union was hard on the once proud Russian space program, laying the groundwork for an astounding partnership with the U.S. It led to a series of 8 shuttle dockings and 7 U.S. visitors to Mir from 1995 through 98. They were eventful years. Computers, cooling, and air purification systems failed, and in 1997, some high drama as the crew fought a fire and watched as a wayward supply ship struck and punctured a science module. Mir's days seemed numbered then.
You can only modify something so many times. You can only repair it using C-clamps and whatever you can take up to the Mir so many times. And then you're much better off coming back and building a whole new system.
Which is precisely what the U.S. and the Russians are doing. But the embryonic International Space Station is not scheduled to be occupied by a joint Russian-American crew until April of next year. If the Russians had their way, they would keep Mir occupied until then, maintaining a continuous presence in space, now nearly 10 years. But in reality, Mir's scientific prowess is no longer up to snuff. Still, even as the current crew prepares to seal the hatch and say "Do svidaniya," there is talk yet another crew may fly to Mir. One more mission to turn out the lights before the station plunges into the Pacific next year. Miles O'Brien, CNN.
CNN's Jill Doherty is in Russia's mission control near Moscow. She joins us now with details of the final minutes of Mir's active life. Jill?
Well, John, there was a lot of quiet here in this room at Mission Control as the cosmonauts bade farewell, a couple of very brief comments, and then a final wave by the commander as he shut the hatch. And at this moment, probably about 45 minutes from now or so, they will be blasting off, actually returning, undocking from the Mir and heading on back to land back in Kazakhstan. But the Mir will be staying up there now for probably another half year, and then if things go as it's expected, that will be the end of Mir. It will start to slowly descend to Earth and then finally down to a watery grave in the Pacific Ocean. And with us here at Mission Control, we have Mark Severance. He is with NASA, the Houston Support Group. And Mark, I know that you were watching very carefully. You've been coming here for about 3.5, 4 years. What went through your mind when you saw them actually say goodbye?
Well, it was kind of a mixed emotions type of feeling. There was a sense of celebration in the accomplishment of operating a space station for 13.5 years on orbit, which is not at all an easy task. And there was a sense of sadness that something that has been around so long and has been a part of so many people's lives for so long is ending. So it was kind of a mixed feeling, really.
You know, every time we seem to refer to the Mir, at least over the past couple of years, it's been the troubled space station. Is that a bum rap, or how would you define the troubles that it did go through?
It went through a lot of challenging times, certainly, and both the Russian teams and the American teams were challenged to deal with that. But I don't think that it was anything that both teams couldn't handle. I don't think anything that was done that was necessarily unsafe. And we were able to work together and solve all the problems and continue operating. And that's a tribute to the folks in this room who work in this room in these facilities and that have been working space stations in the Russian program for many years.
And what specifically did the United States get out of the cooperation that it had with the Russians on Mir?
Well, I think you can categorize that in 2 categories. One, basic space operations tasks. For instance, we never docked the space shuttle to anything before we docked it to Mir, and that's something that's absolutely fundamental if we're going to use the space shuttle to build and resupply space stations. So we got that experience. We also got experience working with our Russian partners, operating day-to-day on a long-term program, very much different from doing relatively short shuttle missions of 2 weeks at a piece when you have crew members on board for months at a time. And third, we had a chance to test out some of the experiment hardware that we were going to take or are going to take to the International Space Station. We had experiments going on in microgravity sciences, fundamental biology, human medicine, a broad scope of things that we're going to be pursuing on the International Space Station.
Are there actually pieces or equipment from the Mir that will physically end up on the International Space Station?
Probably not a lot of hardware, very little, if any, that has been taken from Mir and will be transported to ISS. That was a question that was asked, and both sides looked at that and it was determined it was not cost effective to essentially take all the hardware out and putting in a moving van, the space shuttle, and relocate it. But A lot of the experiments that we did fly flew as a preliminary version on board Mir and have since been tweaked or taken in whole and will be installed on the International Space Station.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. Mark Severance from NASA, Houston Support Group. And Jonathan, again, another 40 minutes or so, we hopefully will have that undocking from the Mir, and the cosmonauts, 3 of them, 2 Russians, 1 Frenchman, will be on their way back to Earth.
Jill Doherty, just outside Moscow. We'll be back to you then. Thanks very much. Right now we have to take a short break, but when we return, a conversation with a former tenant in that outer space. Stay with us. In March of 1995, Norm Thagard became the first U.S. astronaut to take up residence on Mir. He spent 4 months aboard. He was one of a number of visitors from a number of countries who all had a chance to learn something about space and Russians in space while aboard. Welcome back. In its 13 years, Mir endured 1,600 different breakdowns, including a fire and a near-fatal crash. But Norm Thagard says he felt safe aboard and found much to admire about the men that he worked with. Norm Thagard joins us now. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Jonathan.
What are your thoughts on a day like today when it looks like the last men are leaving Mir?
I have ambivalence. On the one hand, it evokes feelings of nostalgia in me, but on the other hand, I'm glad that the Russians are now going to concentrate on their role as partners in the International Space Station.
Let me ask you, to be nostalgic for a moment, can you tell us, first of all, what your impression was, what your physical impressions were the first time you went through the hatch and entered?
The friendliness of the Russian crew that was already on board. They handed me a tray with bread and salt on it, which is a traditional Russian greeting. I had been told that the Mir station's atmosphere was clean and didn't smell, and that certainly proved to be the case. And the station was really quite roomy.
How different was it from the U.S. craft that you've been on?
That flight was considerably different than my shuttle flights. Those flights were no longer than 8 days, and you were in a cabin. Maybe on a couple of those flights we had the Space Lab module back in the payload bay. But the internal volume of the Mir station was much greater than what I'd been used to.
So it was more comfortable?
It was more comfortable, but then you would want that because the station was designed to keep people up there for months, if not years at a time.
Now, the statistics are remarkable, and we quoted just one coming into this conversation, 1,600 breakdowns. There are jokes on television that compare Mir to an old car. Did it feel that way to you? Was it a dangerous place to spend so much time?
No, it really wasn't a dangerous place, but it's interesting that you use the car analogy because that's exactly what our flight engineer, Gennady Strikalov, said, and I thought he said it very well. He said, it's like your car. He says, you can keep it running for 20 years if you want to, or you can junk it after 6 months, and that certainly was the case with the Mir.
You have to keep an old car well-equipped with new parts, though, and every once in a while we would hear about resupply ships being delayed. You're stuck up there, a great long distance from home. How well organized was the supply operation? How well equipped were the Russians to get food up for the men and equipment up for the work?
Certainly while I was there, the food supply and the water supply and everything else was still pretty much on schedule. They were bringing up Progress resupply ships, and one came up while I was up there. I think one of the neat things that the Shuttle Mir program demonstrated, though, was how much more useful it is to have some vehicle like the shuttle with its up capability and down capability. The shuttle made the station more useful, and the station certainly provided a role for the shuttle.
Apart from the technology, on a human level, what's it like to be stuck so far from home with essentially strangers for that length of time?
Fortunately, my crewmates really weren't strangers. Gennady and Volodya and I had trained together for almost a year before we launched, and in that I was really unique because I was a member of the 18th Primary Expedition to Mir Station, and we got along quite well because we had gotten time to get used to one another before we launched. I thought that the Russians pretty much ran things very similarly to what we did, and I didn't have a huge sense of cultural shock, certainly.
Did you have cabin fever, though?
Well, it wasn't like you had your home entertainment center, or you could go out to your favorite movie or bar or something like that. It did have its limitations in terms of entertainment, but I think most folks that fly know that they're up there primarily to do a job, and that was the spirit in which I took it.
Most of us who fly get to see a movie from time to time. What did you do in the free moments that you had? How do you relax in a place that confined and unchanging?
We actually did have movies. There were a number of taped movies up there, and on Friday or Saturday nights, if we weren't otherwise busy, we would watch them. Some of them were even American movies, like Pretty Woman, but they were all overdubbed with a Russian soundtrack. I think what most folks do when they have free time in space, they prefer to just go over the window and look out at the world, and that's where I spent most of my free time.
Is that your most vivid impression of being up there, is just looking out the window?
I think my most vivid impressions are watching the vehicles that came up to dock with the Mir, and there were three. The Progress resupply ship that I already mentioned, and actually a new module, the Spectre module, came up and was added to the Mir station while I was there. And then I have a really nice video that I took out of one of the windows of the Mir as the space shuttle came up for its docking, and we pass over, and you can see it in the background, the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, the Nile River. It's just really a great shot.
It was during an docking experiment or attempt with an unmanned ship that Mir had the crash that frightened so many people, and certainly the men aboard. Is that the most dangerous time to be aboard Mir or a space station? Was that the most dangerous part of the trip for you?
I think the most dangerous times are going to be when vehicles are going to dock with a station. It's like an airplane landing or taking off. It's when you're going to come in contact with something and you've got some relative motion between some very massive vehicles that problems can occur.
Were you ever really scared to be up there? Ever concerned about ever getting back?
I was never concerned about that. I like to point out to folks that if we were really concerned about the safety of folks that fly in space, we'd never launch them in the first place, because 99% of the risk, I think, actually is riding the rocket that takes you up to the station, not being on the station.
Now, I want to ask you more about the culture of being up there. Is it different being in space with Russians than it has been for you with Americans?
It was probably somewhat different, but I had crewmates on past missions from other countries. On my 1992 flight, for instance, Ulf Mirboll from Germany and Roberta Bondar from Canada were on board with me, so I was used to that aspect. It did lend a different flavor to it, but fortunately, Volodya and Gennady and I knew each other quite well even before we launched, and we'd had quite a long time to get used to one another.
Can you generalize broadly about what Russians are like in space versus Americans or Canadians or Germans?
I think in general probably Russian commanders are a little bit more authoritarian. They tend in that direction than American commanders, but nothing really out of the ordinary. And Gennady Strikalov, our flight engineer, was one of the nicest people I ever flew with. Anytime Gennady would come through the module where I was and saw me working, he'd always offer to help. I mean, just a heck of a nice guy.
Now, Mir was designed to have people aboard. In just a short time, they're going to be gone. How long could it stay up there with no one to fix the little breakdowns or the big breakdowns? Is it a good idea for it to just float around waiting for someone to come back?
I don't think they're waiting for someone to come back, and the answer is no one really knows, because you can't know when those systems will fail. The Russians did actually rescue an earlier station after they had abandoned it, so if they did have to go up later on and get it back in operation, it's conceivable they could do that because there is precedent for it.
Why does it make more sense for it to come down rather than just stay up there?
If you're not going to use it, there's no reason for it to be in orbit, and I think from our standpoint, the American standpoint, we would want the Russians, especially with their economic difficulties anyway, to focus their efforts on support of the International Space Station.
But is it safer for everyone concerned, both people who travel in space and the rest of us who are stuck here on Earth, is it safer to bring it down than to just leave it up?
If you're going to leave it up, then it's going to be a continuing expense. It's going to require continuing attention. You'll have to reboost its orbit, meaning you'll have to send a spacecraft up, because the Mir itself has no capability for reboost. So the only way to quit expending resources on it is simply to ultimately let it enter.
So it's going to come down anyway on its own?
If you don't do anything active to maintain it, it will slowly descend and finally get to the heavier layers of the atmosphere and then burn up.
How safe is it when it comes down? Is there any experience, whether on the Russian side or the U.S. side, in bringing something of that size down to Earth?
Remember, we had the Skylab, and we did let it enter. We did try to control its attitude so that we had some control over where it entered. But you may remember that Skylab rained some debris over Australia. Fortunately, it didn't hit anyone, and the same possibility exists for the Mir.
There is always, looking ahead, the International Space Station that is supposed to be the successor to Mir. Are ambitions for that different because of Mir? Is the example of Mir, the conclusions drawn from Mir, going to be, apart from the technology, affecting how Americans, Russians, everyone else views what the space station will do?
I think it already has. I think we learned from Mir what Mir can do. We learned how you operate a space station. I thought the Shuttle Mir program was great because it let the United States learn a lot about space station operations at a very inexpensive price. It also, the Mir experience led to some design changes for the International Space Station that probably make it a better station.
What did it tell you or the Russians or anyone participating about working between different countries and different governments? Were there important differences of opinion about technology, about safety, about human resources kinds of decisions? Did the Russians and the Americans running this project find it easy to work together, as easy as if they had just been working with their own nationals?
I thought at the working level throughout my involvement in the program, folks got along really well. I thought all our focuses were the same. We all shared the concerns about safety and making the operation a successful one. I think if nothing else, it demonstrated that you can do these complex international programs successfully, and I think that augurs well for things like ultimate missions to Mars.
Do you think Mir would have been run differently, though, if the United States had been running it? Would it have been abandoned sooner, for example?
Perhaps the Mir would not have been abandoned quite as soon had the United States been running it, because, of course, we have the resources to continue to support a station. I think the problem for the Russians is economically they can't support both the Mir and the International Space Station at the same time, and they are partners in the International Space Station.
It's interesting that you say that. So you think with enough money, enough goodwill, Mir could still be flying, still be occupied, still be doing good science?
I think so. Again, I would go back to what Gennady said. It's like your car. You can maintain it for 20 years. You can maintain the Mir, I'm sure, for quite a long time. It does get more expensive. It requires more attention, as your car does as time goes along.
Tell us about the International Space Station and how it's going to be different at a human level. Once again, I want to come back to this because I'm just fascinated about what it's like to live up there. Are they making big changes in how they think about living conditions for men and women up there because of the experience you had on Mir or in the shuttle?
Well, I think if there has been a change in the direction of operations of space station, it has been the recognition that when you have international crews, it does create conditions that are different than when you have just a single nationality crew. So I think now we realize that you have to provide support for everyone that's up there. There has to be some tailoring of the support from the ground based on who the particular crew member is. So we certainly have learned that lesson.
We've talked about Mir, the space station. There's also Mars. Is any of this useful when it comes to a possible trip there, or just does it just attract money and scientific time away from that kind of project?
No, it actually does help for ultimate Mars exploration, because clearly we're not going to send folks off to Mars till we're sure that's a safe thing to do. The Mir station allowed Dr. Valery Poryakov to be up there for over 14.5 months. The International Space Station will afford that same sort of opportunity. And the nice thing is, if you determine during the course of time that the conditions aren't safe to continue with a particular person in orbit, you can bring them back. If you've already sent them off to Mars, you don't have that option.
Is there any limit that's been revealed or been suggested by the experience on Mir for how long people can safely spend in space?
Right now, there are two things I think that would concern me, and one is the mineral loss from bone, because that seems to be an ongoing process, and clearly you don't want folks to come back from Mars and break legs just stepping off a curve. And the other thing is the continuing radiation exposure. There are limits, safe limits, to which you shouldn't exceed.
What kind of shape were you in when you came back, and how did you feel your first day, seeing your first moments for that matter, seeing the sun and breathing fresh air?
It was really an exhilarating experience. I had taken great pains while up there to exercise on a very regular basis, and although I was very heavy, I found I was able to stand and walk off the vehicle with no assistance. But it's such a neat thing to come back after months and months and see friends again and family and tell them how it all was. I remember one of my crewmates once, he says, the best thing about spaceflight is coming back so you can tell everybody how it was.
Do you feel hungover when you get back? The mix of oxygen has got to be different. Your body feels so different. Can you liken it to any experience that the rest of us might have had?
It's a little tough. If you've ever been sick and in bed at bed rest for a while, then you'll appreciate the difficulty of just suddenly getting up. And it's sort of like that when you first try to stand up after return to Earth. If you've been in space that long, balance feels funny. For instance, if I would lean forward, I felt like if I weren't careful, I'd just keep going forward, and that persisted for about 5 days. So you clearly can tell that you've been in a different sort of situation. Sometimes you almost wish you could evoke those responses again, because they are kind of interesting and almost fun, I think.
Professor, engineer, and former space traveler, Norm Thagard. Thanks very much for being with us.
My pleasure, Jonathan.
One last word before we go, a measure of the extraordinary endurance of both Mir and the men and women who flew it. Cosmonaut Sergei Avdeyev had been in space before he was assigned to duty as one of the last 3 crewmen aboard Mir, and on this mission he has been there an awfully long time in continuous orbit for 389 days. By the time he returns Saturday, he will have spent a record 742 days in orbit in total, more than 2 years. Or to put it another way, at age 43, about a 10th of his adult life. Thanks for joining us. That's Insight this day. I'm Jonathan Mann. The news continues in just a moment. See the end of an era in Russian science and in space. Mir's life as a manned space station is essentially over. The 3 last crew members aboard the aging Russian craft are now in the Soyuz escape capsule and are about to undock from Mir. Their journey back to Earth aboard the Soyuz is to take about 3 hours, but from now and for the foreseeable future, Mir itself will be unmanned. CNN's Moscow bureau chief Jill Doherty joins us now from Russian Mission Control in Korolyov, Russia. Jill?
Well, John, for the past couple of hours, that crew, the 3 men, as you mentioned, 2 Russians, 1 Frenchman, have been in the Soyuz capsule getting ready to leave. Actually, for the past few weeks, they've been taking any type of equipment or computer information, experiments, etc., from the Mir that they felt and had been determined by the various countries would be useful to take back to Earth and possibly be to put on the International Space Station. So they are going to be closing and taking off, saying goodbye to the Mir, undocking. And as you mentioned, it's actually a comparatively short trip back. And there we're now seeing what looks like the live picture that we expected of the Soyuz capsule ready to undock from the Mir. These men have spent quite a long time up there. The French astronaut was doing experiments, and that was one of the primary things that the Mir did, a lot of experiments, some of them helpful to science. Some Russians would say they didn't see too much spin-off from that program, but certainly in a broader sense, there were a lot of experiments that did help. The big question, of course, why is it coming down? Essentially, it's money. Russia simply cannot afford what was originally estimated about $200 million a year. They actually got that down to about $100 million, maybe even $50 million, they said, per year could do it, but they simply couldn't raise the money. So for the next about 6 months, John, the Mir will be remaining in space, gradually, slowly lowering its orbit, coming closer and closer to Earth, and then it will actually be drawn into the Earth's atmosphere, burn up, at least a lot of it will burn up, and then eventually end up pieces falling into the Pacific Ocean. So that's the plan, and now these men are almost ready to come back to the Earth.
Jill, we were looking at the live picture there of the outside of the spacecraft, but a short time ago, we actually saw the 2 cosmonauts and the French astronaut as they were making their way out of the Mir. It was a bittersweet moment, or so it seemed. What were they saying at the time?
It was. Actually, the commander, Viktor Afanasyev, was saying that they were leaving a little piece of Russia, as he put it, leaving the Mir space station and leaving, as he said, the Mir space station in good working order. Obviously, that's one thing that they would love, to be able to come up with that money and keep it working. After all, it's Russia's only individual Russian space venture right now, except for some rockets that they do set off for payloads. But this was symbolic for Russians. So there was that feeling of pathos, which you certainly could feel a lot of emotion, at least among the Russians in the hall here at Mission Control, as they watched that goodbye. And then Afanasyev, the commander, one last wave back, and then he closed the hatch. Since then, we haven't seen them. They've been inside that capsule. But back here in the rooms talking to people, a lot of the Russians were certainly captured by the emotion of the moment. And many of them said that even though the Mir had problems, so many infamous problems, that every time there was something was learned from it. And a lot of that experience, even the bad experience, will do duty on the new International Space Station.
As we look at these pictures of the men who may be the final three, let me ask you about just how final the human presence aboard Mir is. How likely is it that someone will be back? How likely is it that someone will be back to stay for a long time, the way these men did?
Well, you know, that's a question that constantly comes up. Any long-term project is very dubious because, again, there is no money. And they tried to get it, but they were unable to do that. Now, a crew, we are told, could go back to, in essence, make sure everything is ready to be brought back to Earth, that everything will function properly, and essentially turn off the lights, say goodbye. They would come in either February or March of next year. And again, prep it, make sure everything's all set, but leave very quickly. There is one very, very outside chance that actually a Russian actor with whom we spoke tonight, he's here in the hall, is hoping that maybe he can go up for the movie producer, Russian movie producer, and have a few scenes shot on Mir. He actually told us he is in training. But when you ask, is that a realistic possibility, he knocked on wood and he said it really depends on God. So it's dubious, John, that you really will get anybody up there again for any long-term projects.
What are the technical hurdles to even sending another crew up there to close it down properly? How badly does Russia need to do that? How hard would it be to get it done?
Well, it's pretty much ready, from what I understand, ready to be shut down permanently. They, both the United States, Russia, and others who would be dealing with the International Space Station took a look at the equipment that they have and computers, etc., and determined that some of it should be taken back and perhaps will ultimately find its way onto the International Space Station. But this is now, some of it is quite old hardware and is not really, they determined, worth it to put in the International Space Station. So in essence, they really do not really need a crew to go back and shut it down. It's just one of the things that they might do protectively.
If you're just joining us, what we're watching here is 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 French astronaut aboard the Soyuz capsule undocking from Mir, leaving behind the longest-serving human settlement in space. CNN's Moscow Bureau Chief Jill Doherty is watching along with us. Jill, what are they saying at Mission Control now?
Well, John, it's a little hard to hear exactly what they were saying, but there was certainly applause, actually the first time tonight, applause as the undocking successfully happened, and they are now pulling away from the Mir. Before, when they said their goodbyes, it was a quiet moment, but now there's a feeling that this part of the mission seems to be working properly. You know, whenever you look at the Mir, of course, you remember the accidents and the things that happened that were close to disasters. And there's always that kind of lump in the throat, will it all work? So here, people feel quite confident that this will work out easily, that they'll come back. The crew actually lands their spaceship in Kazakhstan, not in the water as is sometimes done, but on land. 3 hours from now, roughly, they'll be back in Kazakhstan.
It is very late now in much of Russia. Do you think Russians are huddled around television sets watching the way some of us elsewhere are? Is this a moment of pride? Is it a moment of great interest to Russians, or is it just another day in a country that's seeing its glories fade?
Well, John, it is. It's early. It's about 1:20 in the morning. I'm sure that there are some people who are very interested in the space program, but essentially they're concerned with things down on the ground. In fact, that was one of the major parts of the debate over what should happen to the Mir. Why should they spend even $50 million when the government is essentially broke and people are not getting pensions? And for quite a while, people felt that the money should be spent down on Earth. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of pride in the space program. We came out, as we drove out to the command center today, we drove by two famous statues, a big statue to Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, another beautiful statue of a rocket that went up in the 60s. And there's pride in that. But to many Russians, that seems very far away and long ago in a country that's really suffering.
What we're looking at now is perhaps a monument in its own right, a monument to Soviet science, to Russian endurance, and now a monument in a way to Moscow's cash troubles. We're looking at Mir. This is a view from a camera aboard the Soyuz capsule. 3 men are aboard that capsule. The Mir itself is empty, and it may be empty for months or forever as Russia prepares to abandon the Mir, perhaps permanently. The Mir is to be brought down within a few months' time. Joe, we've been asking this question of other people. Let me ask it of you. Are the Russians confident they can bring Mir down safely? Are they nervous about pieces of it falling into populated areas?
Well, there's some concern. Certainly, they feel that they probably can do it. That's the plan. But even the commander, I believe it was a couple of days ago, said he would not want to leave that up too long in space, because like anything else, you cannot guarantee 100% that equipment is not going to malfunction or something would happen. And certainly the history of the Mir is replete with all sorts of snafus and technical problems. So there's no guarantee. But they certainly do have a plan to have a lot of it burn up in the atmosphere and then land out in the Pacific.
As we're looking at this, I'm thinking that human eyes may never get a chance to see better what we're watching now. There may be no one coming back. There may be no cameras coming back from that craft where men and women spent so much time, so much effort, so many brave moments. This was a place of enormous scientific achievement, but we're losing our picture of it there. It was a place of enormous endurance and bravery. Russians, Americans, the French, the Japanese, the Germans, the Canadians, the others who were there spent days and days proving what men and women could accomplish in space. That accomplishment has apparently come to an end. Jill Doherty, we're looking once again at the live picture from Soyuz of the newly abandoned Mir space station, the undocking now some minutes in the past. No word that I've heard of any communication from Russian mission control to the men aboard the spacecraft, but I imagine hearts are heavy in Russia, a place that had enormous success in space science and now is saying goodbye to its greatest success.
Yes, and John, I believe that is now a graphic picture, actually, not a real picture, but that is what will be happening. They'll be heading back to Earth over the next 3 hours.
Jill Doherty, our Moscow bureau chief. Once again, if you're only joining us, Mir and Soyuz have now parted company. The Russian space station is empty. Its last 3 resident crew members have left. There is some question about whether humans will ever set foot in Mir again. The space station, the 3 men aboard it, have parted company. Mir is empty. It will remain empty for at least several months. It will then return to Earth. I'm Jonathan Mann at the CNN Center in Atlanta. More news right after this.
This has been a CNN live event.
Packed and ready to go, Mir's 27th crew closed the hatch on Russia's space station and said goodbye.
On the occasion of this departure of the 27th crew from the Mir station. We undertake this with heavy heart and anticipate the future arrival of other crews to renew the work that we've been doing here.
A poignant moment in the Mir's 13-and-a-half-year life. Through all the triumphs and disasters, the Mir kept on circling the globe more than 70,000 times, surviving more than twice as long as its builders had dreamed. But Russia can no longer afford to keep the Mir in space, especially when it must find the rubles to pay for its share of the new International Space Station.
We have separation.
The crew, 2 Russian cosmonauts and 1 Frenchman, now head home to Earth on their Soyuz spaceship, a 3-hour journey. Special equipment is supposed to keep the empty Mir circling the globe until February or March of next year, when it will be thrust into a lower orbit and ultimately, hopefully, drown in the Pacific Ocean. There is a slight possibility another crew could visit the Mir just before it's sent to its watery grave to turn out the lights for good. There's even a possibility an actor could be sent up to shoot a few scenes aboard. The end of the Mir is a real blow to the country that invented space stations. Even when things went wrong on Mir, it taught invaluable lessons. Computers broke down, cooling systems leaked, a fire broke out, but crews rolled up their sleeves and fixed it.
We never tested in real flight, and no one would allow to do this. But accidentally, after many years of flight, it happens on board Mir. So we are going to use this experience in next space station also.
The crew has packed up computer equipment and scientific experiments, which they'll bring back to Earth. Flight Commander Viktor Afanasyev says right now all the equipment aboard is in working order. But he cautions he wouldn't want to leave the station vacant in space for too long. Absolute technical reliability, he says, is impossible to achieve. And with the aging space station's history of glitches, no one can guarantee there won't be more. Here at Mission Control, there was a lot of applause when the crew actually undocked from the Mir space station. They are now in their capsule. They're on their way back to Earth. And if everything goes according to plan, in just about 2.5, a little less than 2.5 hours, they should be back on land, touching down in Kazakhstan. I'm Jill Doherty, CNN Live, reporting from Mission Control.
And joining us now from Atlanta is former Mir crew member Norm Thagard. He spent 4 months aboard the Russian spacecraft in 1995, the first American astronaut to do so. Thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
From a scientific point of view, what was the real value of the Mir mission?
I think the principal value of the Mir was the demonstration that you can maintain a space station in orbit and continuously use it for over a decade.
And what about the cross-cultural aspect of this? Was it valuable?
Of course it was valuable. We learned that you can do one of these complex projects, the Shuttle Mir program, even across international boundaries, and I think that augurs very well for the future and things like Mars missions.
What's the future, do you think, of the Russian space program?
They're our partners in the International Space Station. One of the advantages of abandoning Mir at this point in time is it does allow them now to devote their full energies to their role in that station.
You know as well as anyone that while Mir was in the air, there were plenty of problems. Was it past time to take people off of that?
No, I think that if you had the resources to do it, you could sustain Mir for maybe as long as you wanted to almost. But it really does, as it ages, require more and more attention.
Your strongest recollection?
I think coming on board and being greeted with a traditional Russian greeting of bread and salt, just the camaraderie, all the folks involved were my fondest recollections.
Norm Thagard, thanks so much for joining us from Atlanta.
Let's come down to Earth after closing the door on the Mir space station. Hello and welcome to World News. I'm Marina Colby at the CNN Center. The crew of Russia's 13-year-old Mir space station is back safely on Earth. The 2 Russians and a Frenchman landed in a field in Kazakhstan. The craft came down not far from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, which is used by Russia to launch manned space flights. A spokesman said the capsule had a soft landing in a pre-planned area. Military helicopters and ambulances went to the scene to assist the three. The cosmonauts were said to be in good shape, although full medical checks were to be performed. CNN's Moscow Bureau Chief Jill Doherty reports on the fate of the world's longest-serving space station.
In the end, the Mir was more than just a 136-ton space station. It was home to cosmonauts and astronauts from 9 nations. The last goodbye of the last working crew was heartfelt.
Everyone who participated.
We're leaving a little bit of Russia behind. Commander Viktor Afanasyev waved goodbye and closed the hatch. The crew, 2 Russians and a Frenchman, left for Earth. At Mission Control near Moscow, others said a silent farewell. People like Vladimir Sidemyatnikov, one of the Mir's designers.
Our life was so deeply involved with this program.
Sigmund Yain was there too, the first European cosmonaut to fly with Russians 21 years ago.
A lot of cosmonauts and astronauts, Russian ones, European ones, American ones, did a lot of good work. And now, I mean, after 13, 14 years nearly, it's okay.
One of the Mir's greatest accomplishments was its longevity. 13.5 years, more than double what its builders dreamed. Plenty of triumph, plenty of disasters, plenty of lessons.
From a damage control standpoint and emergency procedures, and we learned a lot of lessons that will be applied to the space station to make it safer.
Money was one problem cash-strapped Russia could not overcome, especially when it had to contribute to the new International Space Station. The empty Mir will remain in orbit for 6 more months, until eventually burning up and falling in pieces into the Pacific Ocean. One man still hopes to visit Mir, a Russian actor playing a cosmonaut who wants to be filmed aboard the space station.
It's really sad to leave the Mir because it really became home and a part of our life. It would be good if this crew says goodbye and we say hello.
More than half the cosmonauts who flew on the Mir were from other countries, and Russian officials say the Mir's legacy is truly international, a good first step on the road to the new International Space Station. Jill Doherty, CNN, Russian Mission Control.
Der russischen Raumstation Mir ist am Morgen sicher zur Erde zurückgekehrt. Um 2:33 Uhr mitteleuropäischer Zeit landeten die 3 Astronauten, 2 Russen und ein Franzose, in der Steppe Kasachstans. Nach mehr als 13 Jahren Dienst umrundet die Mir nun ferngesteuert die Erde. In einigen Monaten wird die Raumstation wahrscheinlich kontrolliert zum Absturz gebracht werden.
Ein letztes Winken, Klappe zu, das war es. Abkoppeln der Raumfähre Soyuz von der Raumstation Mir. Die letzte Crew fliegt Richtung Erde. Kurz vorher hatten die 3, 2 Russen und ein Franzose, noch eine Pressekonferenz gegeben. Wir gehen schweren Herzens, wir lassen ein kleines Stück Russland zurück, so Afanasyev vor dem Umstieg. Nichts mehr mit Fitness im All, nichts mehr mit schwebenden Wasserblasen. Wie eine Heimat war die Raumstation für viele Kosmonauten. Kein Wunder, war sie doch fast ununterbrochen besetzt. Fast 13 Jahre lang kreiste das kollektorbestückte Gerät im All. Doch die vielen Pannen zeigten, die Station war in die Jahre gekommen. Das finanzschwache Russland konnte sich eine Generalüberholung nicht leisten. Für die Mir heißt das kontrollierter Absturz in den Pazifik. Ein trauriges Ende einer großen Raumstation.
Soyuz ist die letzte Crew der russischen Raumstation Mir zur Erde zurückgekehrt. Die Kosmonauten, 2 Russen und ein Franzose, landeten kurz nach 2:30 mitteleuropäischer Zeit in der kasachischen Steppe. Die Männer seien erschöpft, aber wohlauf, hieß es. Die verlassene Raumstation kreist nun ferngesteuert um die Erde. Im nächsten Frühjahr soll der Stolz der russischen Raumfahrt im Pazifik versinken.
Die letzten Kosmonauten haben die russische Raumstation Mir verlassen und sind sicher zur Erde zurückgekehrt. Im nächsten Jahr soll die Mir über den Pazifik abstürzen. Trotz vieler Pannen an Bord hat die Station in den vergangenen 13 Jahren bewiesen, dass Menschen dauerhaft im All leben können. Thorsten Berger berichtet.
Ende aus vorbei. Der unsanfte Schluss einer langen Reise heute Morgen in einem Weizenfeld in der kasachischen Steppe. Ein wenig benommen wirkten die 3 Kosmonauten noch, als Bergungsteams ihnen aus der Soyuz-Kapsel halfen. Gestern Abend, wenige Minuten nach 8 deutscher Zeit, war der Russe Afanassjew der Letzte, der aus der Mir ausstieg. Nun schwebt die Raumstation alleine durchs All, zum ersten Mal seit 1986. 13 Jahre Mir, das waren 13 Jahre Raumfahrtgeschichte mit Tausenden von Experimenten und wertvollen Erfahrungen. Auch wenn in den vergangenen Jahren etliche Pannen die Besatzung in Lebensgefahr brachten. Wie der Brand an Bord 1997 und wenige Monate später die Kollision mit einer Transportkapsel. Die russischen Kosmonauten haben gezeigt, wie ein Mensch mehr als ein Jahr im All überstehen kann. Eine wichtige Erfahrung für alle zukünftigen Raumstationen. Und sie haben in dieser Zeit viel Besuch bekommen.
Es ist ja nicht umsonst, dass die Amerikaner über 14 Shuttleflüge gemacht haben zur Mir-Station. Mehr als 40 Amerikaner waren auf der Mir-Station und die haben gelernt.
Auch 3 Deutsche kamen auf die Mir und durften russisches Improvisationstalent erleben. Nicht selten musste einer der Kosmonauten raus ins All, um selbst mit einem Schraubenzieher Lecks zu reparieren. Nun wird niemand mehr an der einsamen Mir herumschrauben. Im April 2000 soll sie kontrolliert über dem weiten Pazifik abstürzen.
Der Letzte macht das Licht aus und schließt die Tür. Es ist ein bitterer Abschied von der Mir im All. Zu viel Arbeit und Mühe, aber auch Träume und Hoffnungen hat nicht nur der letzte Kapitän Afanassjew, sondern Tausende von Mitarbeitern in die Raumstation gesteckt. Auch am Boden will keiner wahrhaben, dass es das gewesen sein soll. Wie alle anderen zuvor landen auch die letzten Mir-Kosmonauten spektakulär, aber sicher in der Wüste Kasachstans. Viele Russen hoffen immer noch auf ein Wunder, hoffen auf Gelder, um die Mir zu modernisieren. Darauf hoffen auch die Kosmonauten. Technisch muss man praktisch nichts ändern. Die Mir arbeitet zuverlässig und funktioniert blendend. Schon die letzten 2 Expeditionen sind praktisch ohne Pannen verlaufen. Nostalgie trübt leicht den Blick für die Realität und die spricht eine andere Sprache. Die Station gehört im Frühjahr 2000 der Vergangenheit an. Sie ist veraltet und wird im Pazifik versenkt. Doch der Nachfolger kommt bald. Die internationale Raumstation ISS, an der auch Deutschland und Russland beteiligt sind, wird Anfang 2000 bezogen.
400 Kilometer freier Fall an Bord der Transportkapsel Sojus. Kurz vor der Erde zünden die Bremstriebwerke. In der kasachischen Steppe hat die russisch-französische Crew das erste Mal wieder festen Boden unter den Füßen. Auch wenn die sie noch nicht tragen, nach 6 Monaten im All. Die Rückkehr dieser letzten Besatzung bedeutet das Ende eines Weltraumabenteuers, das vor 13 Jahren begann. 103 Astronauten forschten seitdem auf der russischen Raumstation, darunter auch der Deutsche Ulf Merbold. Jeder zweite Gast, der sein alltägliches Leben für einige Zeit ins All verlegte, kam nicht aus Russland oder der Sowjetunion. Die Mir überstand fast alles, was es im Weltraum an Pannen gibt. Von Feuer über defekte Sauerstoffanlagen hin bis zur leckgeschlagenen Außenwand. Die Crews hielten durch und zeigten Improvisationstalent. Für Merbold ist es eine Leistung, dass gerade ein angeschlagenes Land wie Russland die Mir so lange im Weltall hielt.
Es irritiert mich maßlos, dass viele unserer Journalisten mit dem Finger auf die Russen zeigen und sagen, jetzt ist schon wieder was kaputt gegangen. Da sollte man doch erst einmal ihnen Bewunderung zollen. Und ich meine, es wäre viel besser, was Konstruktives zu machen und zu demonstrieren, dass man es besser machen kann als die Russen. Aber das passiert ja bei uns nicht.
Wichtiger als alle Pannen sind für Merbold die Experimente an Bord der Mir. Nicht weniger als 16.500. Die Station diente auch als Mini-Zoo. Hier schlüpften die ersten Weltraumküken. Während die unbemannte Mir zunächst ferngesteuert um die Erde kreist, arbeiten 13 Länder bereits an einer neuen internationalen Raumstation. Im nächsten Jahr sollen die ersten Astronauten diese Baustelle beziehen.
Die großen Weltraumnationen Russland und Amerika, die lange Jahre in Konfrontation gearbeitet haben, sind nun zur Kooperation übergegangen. Und das ist, denke ich, auch eine ganz wichtige Seite dieser Raumstation, diese politische Dimension.
Die Mir soll im kommenden Frühjahr über dem Pazifik verglühen, wenn sich bis dahin kein Sponsor gefunden hat.
Die letzte reguläre Besatzung, die russische Raumstation Mir, verlassen und ist zur Erde zurückgekehrt. Finden sich keine neuen Geldgeber, soll Mir im Frühjahr endgültig aufgegeben und über den Pazifik zum Absturz gebracht werden.
Ein letztes Do Svidanje, auf Wiedersehen, von Kommandant Afanassjew in Richtung der Raumstation Mir. Dann schloss er letzte Nacht die Luke, um mit der Raumkapsel Sojus und seinen beiden Kameraden zur Erde zurückzukehren. Eine Mission geht zu Ende. Bei Sonnenaufgang schwebte die letzte Besatzung der Mir über der kasachischen Steppe, bevor die Kapsel glühend heiß fast genau am vorausberechneten Zielpunkt aufschlug. Vor 13 Jahren landete die erste und heute die letzte Dauerbesatzung der russischen Raumstation in einem längst eingespielten Manöver. 2 Russen und ein französischer Astronaut waren es diesmal. Was 1986 fast noch im Kalten Krieg begann, endete als internationale Zusammenarbeit. Jetzt haben die Russen kein Geld mehr. Routine war es auch heute, das stimmt, aber bewegt war auch diese, die letzte Mannschaft der Mir, als sie zur Erde zurückkehrte. Besonders für die Russen war das Raumschiff und das damit verbundene Weltraumprogramm ein Symbol des Nationalstolzes. Der Abschied fiel schwer. Noch bis zum nächsten Frühjahr soll die Mir im Weltraum um die Erde kreisen, bevor sie dann, nach 13,5 Jahren Dienst, zum größten Teil beim Eintritt in die Erdatmosphäre verglühen wird.
Russians this day were a different kind of stunned. It wasn't a sunrise. It was a speech that was delivered by Boris Yeltsin, a speech they expected to be his New Year's message. It wasn't. It was his resignation. CNN's Siobhan Darrow in Moscow with more on the surprise resignation and the transfer of power, which appears to have been smooth. Siobhan?
Well, Jim, in this vast nation spanning 11 time zones, it is not only the end of the millennium, but the end of an era. An ailing Boris Yeltsin shocked the nation when he announced that he was stepping aside in favor of the younger Vladimir Putin, his prime minister, clearly enhancing the chances of Putin to win the presidential elections that will now be held in March, also improving Yeltsin's legacy so he won't be remembered as a decrepit leader clinging to power to the very last minute. He also apologized to the nation for not fulfilling all of the promises and their hopes, and for all the pain of the transition from communism to democracy that he presided over for almost a decade.
Boris Yeltsin gave the Russian people a big surprise on the last day of 1999, announcing his resignation effective immediately.
Russia must enter the millennium with new politicians, with new personalities, and with new, smart, strong, energetic people. And we, who have been in power for many years, must go.
Russian TV showed pictures as the suitcase containing the codes to launch Russia's nuclear weapons was handed from Yeltsin to his successor, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, now acting president. The 47-year-old Putin was Yeltsin's hand-picked choice for elections that were to be held in June and are now expected in March, within 3 months of the transfer of power in accordance with the Russian constitution. Putin, a former KGB agent, was also a reformer in his native St. Petersburg, a combination of toughness and liberal-mindedness that seems to appeal to the Russian people. Recent polls indicate he is popular with 60% of the public. The Russian people seem ready for a fresh face in the Kremlin. It's about time Yeltsin resigned. He should have done so a long time ago, says this woman. At the grand opening of the Church of Christ the Savior, once torn down by Stalin and again rebuilt, the patriarch seemed to have a premonition of change.
With the start of the new year, we put Russia's dramatic history behind us when our nation forgot God. Isn't that the heart of Russia's tragedy in the 20th century?
For much of the 20th century, Russia was the Soviet Union, living under communism. Now it enters the new millennium again as Russia, but still searching for an identity.
If you want it.
Plump chickens and designer boots are on sale in the shops. Father Frost, Russia's Santa equivalent, lures consumers into well-stocked stores instead of the long lines for limited goods of just a decade ago. Muscovites still love to grumble, but do so freely. The 10-year experience of our so-called democracy brought nothing good, says this woman. Only the criminal element has reason for hope. Yet there is a measure of optimism as Russia enters this next century.
There were a lot of doomsday predictions that we would have famine, we would have large-scale civil war, we would have riots or, social unrest.
Looking at Russia from the outside, it can look pretty messy. At the edge of the millennium, the country is mired in yet another Chechen war. The Russian economy is fragile, yet speak to the people who live here, and they are nevertheless celebrating the new year with hope. We're headed for a better future. After all, in Moscow, you can already see improvements, says this woman. I know life is better in the West, but we'll catch up someday. And for all its woes, Russia is a democracy with more choices and opportunity for common people than perhaps any time in its 1,000-year history, as it enters the new millennium with a fresh start.
Meanwhile, there's some good news for the old Russian space station Mir. Officials say a British company has chipped in $7 million to conduct a scientific experiment on Mir. And the company reportedly plans to keep the station operating and eventually refurbish it.
Guten Abend und herzlich willkommen bei Planetopia. Was trägt der modebewusste Astronaut eigentlich drunter? Oder welche Auswirkungen hat die Schwerelosigkeit gar auf die Rechtsträger? Werbung im Weltall, zum Beispiel für Unterhosen, beglückt uns mit bahnbrechenden Fragen wie diesen. Mit solcher Reklame werden aber vor allem neue, aufwendige Weltraumprojekte finanziert, besonders bei den Russen. Ende März reaktivieren sie ihre gute alte Mir mit Hilfe von Sponsoren, aber auch um die neue Raumstation ISS kreisen schon die kühnsten Träume der Marketing-Experten.
Das Heldenquartett des Sat.1 Weltraumthrillers Aeon auf einer Mission in unsere Zukunft.
9, 8, 7,
Das Ziel, die internationale Raumstation ISS.
1, 0.
Die ganze Aktion kostet nicht mehr als 1–2 Millionen.
Geld ist nicht das Problem, Dr. McBain. Wir sind das Geld.
In der wirklichen ISS allerdings wird Geld mit Sicherheit eine Rolle spielen, eine große sogar.
Wir sind da.
2007 soll die ISS durchs All schweben. Das Projekt von Raumfahrtorganisationen aus aller Welt, 50 Milliarden Dollar teuer, soll Forum werden für Wissenschaft und Werbung.
Ich denke, es wird nicht möglich sein, die Entwicklungskosten komplett wieder hereinzuholen über die Kommerzialisierung der Raumfahrtaktivitäten. Was aber sehr wohl möglich sein sollte und was wir auch anstreben, ist den Betrieb solcher Anlagen letztlich kommerziell durchzuführen.
Werbung im All. Erste Erfahrungen kann Bratke am nächsten Mittwoch schon einmal sammeln mit Space Mail 2000, einer Aktion der Deutschen Post. Von einer Startrampe im brasilianischen Alcantara soll eine postgelbe Rakete abheben. In 150 Kilometern Höhe entlässt das Geschoss seine Ladung in die Unendlichkeit. 2000 Postkarten, Space Mail eben. Kuriose Marketingmöglichkeiten im Orbit. Gerade die Russen haben es dem Rest der Welt bereits vorgemacht. Mit dem Oldtimer aller Raumstationen, ihrer Mir. Denn in den Statuten des Betreibers steht ausdrücklich, Werbung auf und im Weltraumbahnhof ist erlaubt, sogar erwünscht, gegen Bares. Und so wurde die Mir-Bodenstation Baikonur im kargen Kasachstan zur TV-Regie für einen Werbespot mit dem westlichsten aller Symbole, einer übergroßen Cola-Dose. Der Brausemulti ließ die Kosmonauten für mehrere Millionen Dollar mit der Riesendose abheben. Ein schwereloser Clip, gedreht mit einfacher Videokamera, dafür aber mit ausgefeiltem Skript.
Die Bewegung in der Schwerelosigkeit ist nicht ganz so einfach wie auf der Erde, wo man ein Bezugssystem hat. Man kann zum Beispiel nicht zu dem Kosmonauten sagen, weiter nach oben, weil oben ist ja nicht so klar definiert. Ist zwar schon mit gewissen Farben in der Raumstation gekennzeichnet, aber es wird schon komplizierter. Das Drehbuch muss schon etwas genauer verfasst werden.
Mit weiteren Aktionen, darunter der Präsentation von Space-Schokolade und weltraumfesten Kugelschreibern für den US-Shopping-Sender QVC, nahmen die Mir-Betreiber so viel Geld ein, dass der Unterhalt der eigentlich maroden Raumstationen gesichert wurde. Ideenpool galaktischer Reklame ist die Leipziger Werbeagentur VRS. Ulrich Grüner ermöglicht alles. Vom Aufnäher am Astronautenanzug ab 30.000 Dollar bis zum Firmenlogo auf der Raketenkapsel für 2,5 Millionen.
Wenn der Kunde genug Geld hat, fliegen wir ihn auch auf den Mond.
In den Weltraum schaffte es mit Hilfe der VRS auch das sächsische Kultlabel Bruno Banani. Boss Wolfgang Jassner ließ seine exotischen Slips, getreu dem Motto große Wäsche, starker Auftritt, in den Orbit schießen. Mode auf der Mir, der Kosmonaut als schwebendes Model für Unterhosen und Hemden. Das bahnbrechende Ergebnis, im Weltraum-Härtetest bekam das Chemnitzer Unterwäsche-Universum das Logo Spaceproof, Weltraum geeignet. Ein Marketing-Gag, den sich Bruno Banani seitdem auf die Slips nähen lässt. Der Boss gibt sich noch heute tief beeindruckt von seiner Idee.
Und oben haben die Kosmonauten Bruno Banani bei ihrem täglichen Training getestet und es auch für sehr gut befunden, auch in der Schwerelosigkeit. Und das war natürlich ein tolles Ergebnis. Somit hat jeder heute, der Bruno Banani trägt, der die Qualitäten trägt, mit einem Hauch Schwerelosigkeit. Und das ist sicher einmalig weltweit.
Dieser Reklameclou war für die Slipschneider ein wahrer Take-off. Sie sicherten sich die Vorrangstellung in ihrem Marktsegment und verdoppelten den Umsatz auf über 20 Millionen.
Das Investment war nicht gering, aber es hat sich für uns auf jeden Fall ausgezahlt. Und wir fanden natürlich diese Art der Werbung so toll und so einmalig, weil man da auch eine gewisse Alleinstellung hat.
Eine Alleinstellung wird auch die erste TV-Sendung live aus dem All haben. Keine Utopie mehr. Schon wird für die ISS ein Studiomodul entwickelt, aus dem Magazine oder Shows ausgestrahlt werden können. Vorbild wieder einmal die Russen.
Die Mir-Station wurde ja schon immer für Live-Übertragungen genutzt. Das ist ja der einzige Kommunikationsweg für die Kosmonauten. Also die technische Ausrüstung ist vorhanden, man kann das jederzeit machen. Es geht nur darum, ob Sie Schauspieler hochfliegen wollen oder die Kosmonauten als Schauspieler reichen.
Solche Gedanken dürfte sich der Hauptdarsteller des Weltraum-Thrillers Aeon, Bernhard Bettermann, schon gemacht haben. Die Vorstellung, eingepackt im Raumanzug als schwereloser Mime für potente Werbekunden zu agieren, hat nicht nur Verlockendes.
Das ist ein hartes Leben da oben, also der Alltag. Also ich nehme an, wenn man längere Zeit dort oben zubringt und auch nicht unbedingt immer in seinem Leben Astronaut werden wollte, sondern als Schauspieler sagt, gut, ich drehe da oben mit, dann müsste ein bisschen Raum vorhanden sein. Also ich denke, dieses Enge, das macht einen schnell rasend.
Besonders dann, wenn es wirklich eng wird im wirklichen Weltraum. Denn ein verpatzter Shuttle-Stunt kann für Astronautendarsteller auch leicht zum endgültigen Abflug werden.
Unterwäsche in der Umlaufbahn. Das Prädikat weltraumtauglich für seine Dessous hat sich der Modedesigner Bruno Banani einiges kosten lassen. Er war jedoch nicht der einzige Sponsor. Um das Paradestück russischer Weltraumtechnologie zu retten, durfte sogar der ehemalige Klassenfeind in Gestalt einer Kula-Firma der Besatzung Anordnungen geben. Ein Blick in das Innere der Mir offenbart jedoch das Dilemma. Für 5 Jahre ausgelegt wird sie nach 14 Jahren Dauerflug nur noch durch Provisorien zusammengehalten. Schon mehrfach schien das endgültige ausgekommen. Ein Brand zerstörte 1997 ein komplettes Modul, konnte aber gelöscht werden. Kurze Zeit später misslang das Andockmanöver einer Versorgungskapsel und zerstörte einen Großteil der Sonnenkollektoren. Die Mir und mit ihr die russische Raumfahrtindustrie hat jedoch allen Pannen getrotzt. Das Aus kam schließlich aus einer anderen Richtung. Die internationale Raumstation ISS soll zum neuen Vorposten der Menschen im All werden. Ursprünglich sollten bereits dieses Jahr die ersten Kosmonauten einziehen. Doch der Aufbau gerät immer wieder ins Stocken. Erst kürzlich wurde der Start des russischen Servicemoduls erneut um mehrere Monate verschoben. Der Grund? Geldmangel. Die westlichen Partner werden zunehmend nervös, doch niemand möchte sich in die russische Politik einmischen. Im Kreml haben sich derweil die Kräfteverhältnisse verschoben. Der neue starke Mann in Moskau heißt Wladimir Putin. Er hat von Boris Jelzin die Macht geerbt, muss jedoch für die Präsidentschaftswahlen im Juni noch Stimmen im Lager der Nationalisten gewinnen. Was liegt da näher, als den Stolz der russischen Raumfahrt, die Mir zu retten? Ein Versorgungstransporter steht bereit, die Besatzung soll im April folgen. Ein neuer Sponsor hat sich auch schon gefunden. Ein US-Konzern hat bereits 21 Millionen $ zugesagt. Sein Ziel? Ein Mir Space Hotel. Die europäische Raumfahrtindustrie möchte sich zu den abgehobenen Plänen nicht äußern. Nach der kommenden Wahl in Russland wird sich zeigen, ob das Ganze nur aus einer Bierlaune heraus entstanden ist.
Na, hoffentlich werden die Besucher der Mir, die eines Tages da oben vielleicht anstoßen, tatsächlich auch wissen, was sie dort erwartet. Denn die westlichen Astronauten, die die Mir bisher besucht hatten, die haben alle davon berichtet, dass die Station mit der ursprünglichen, in der auch am Boden trainiert wird, überhaupt nichts mehr zu tun hat.
It was originally designed to safely guide Mir to a watery grave, but this unmanned spacecraft has a new mission. Keep the Russian space station aloft and perhaps open for business.
I think we're in the right place at the right time. This is a unique opportunity. They were about to throw away a very valuable asset.
Walt Anderson manages an investment fund called Golden Appel. They're investing heavily in the newly formed Mir Corps. The company hopes to raise $200 million to lease the station from the Russian corporation that operates Mir, and then pitch it as a commercial research platform or even the ultimate destination for tourists with deep pockets.
Something in orbit is priceless compared to what's on the ground.
But Russia's partners in the long-delayed, budget-busting International Space Station are concerned this twist in the long Mir melodrama translates into more delays and more expense.
The Russians, they're just not delivering, and they're putting their resources in keeping Mir afloat, and that to me is a very, very clear signal that they have never been truly serious about their involvement in the International Space Station.
The U.S. and the other 14 nations in the Space Station Partnership are counting on the Russians to deliver several key components. One of them, the Zvezda service module, will allow the station to maintain its orbit and house the first crew. It is already 2 years late, and the Russians say it may not be launched until August. At NASA, the frustration is growing.
It's not for us to tell them what to do on Mir, but it certainly falls in our relationship to have them do what they said they're going to do on the International Space Station. No excuses, no promises, just performance.
So NASA is hedging its bets by tapping the U.S. Naval Research Lab in Washington to build the so-called interim control module. It is designed to pinch hit for the Russian service module. Unless Russia speeds things up, a space shuttle will carry the interim control module to the station in December. It's a $200 million stopgap measure. However you do the arithmetic, the interim control module is proof of one of the few certainties in this far-flung project. A multinational partnership which was sold in part as a way to share costs and thus save the U.S. taxpayers some money has done no such thing. And NASA is finding doing business with the Russians is no bargain at all. Mishaps notwithstanding, the Russians have demonstrated success at extended stays in space. But even with private funding, they may be hard-pressed to service and supply 2 space stations for very long. For Science and Technology Week, I'm Miles O'Brien.
And finally, thrill-seeking tourists in search of that ultimate out-of-this-world destination are already lining up for a trip aboard Russia's Mir space station. CNN's Tom Mentier reports.
It may be the most expensive vacation resort, well, not on Earth, but orbiting more than 100 miles above it. The Russian Mir space station is set to become the destination for well-heeled tourists with deep pockets. A private company called MirCorp announced a deal in London to rent the former Soviet space station for an initial investment of $20 million US.
Yes, we are going to let tourists visit, but those tourists who will be mentally healthy, physically healthy, psychologically healthy, who will not be able to, will not being too emotional, press the wrong button.
We're not some fantasy company. We have a space station, and we have a proven man-rated launch system and a proven cargo launch system that is a better safety and performance record than any other system on the planet.
Mir was abandoned by its crew last August and was set to plunge into the Pacific Ocean later this year. The 14-year-old space station was built with a planned lifespan of 5 years. It is rusted and contaminated with chemicals, but is still one of a kind.
We're interested in this project and going ahead and have attracted capital because the Mir is in orbit. And those of us in the space business understand that something in orbit is priceless compared to what's on the ground.
Just how priceless? Well, a trip to the Mir for fun will set you back anywhere from $12 to $20 million per person. A renovated Mir will accommodate 5 people at a time. That would be $100 million. There is already a waiting list. Just 20 years ago, the thought of space travel for pleasure was not plausible. Following the accident of the American Space Shuttle Challenger, some considered it unsafe. Now with a lease on Mir, a private company can at least offer the trip, a chance to turn science fiction into reality. Tom Intier, CNN, London.
All right, is your name on the list?
No, never. That's Worldview. I'm Bernard Shaw.
And I'm Judy Woodruff. The Moneyline News Hour is next.
Tom mentioned there's a waiting list. Who's interested in going up there?
Well, unfortunately, again, I don't want to always disagree with you, but we don't have a waiting list for wealthy folks to go up on the station. We are in serious negotiations with two individuals. One comes from a family that has space experience, and the other is a very wealthy person from the internet community. And so, as I said, that's one of our markets. It's not the chief market. As your clip showed with Dr. Semyonov, the head of Energia, it's not just a walk in space. It's very dangerous. You'll have to be trained. You'll have to speak some Russian. You'll have to know what to do. So we do have interested people, given the wealth accumulation taking place in the world today. But we're delighted to see how many people we can get, but that's not our primary market. Our primary market is doing some more interesting markets.
Now, as much as Mir became famous for lasting more than its 5-year lifespan, lasting 14 years, in fact, it did become famous for all the problems it had, the leaks and problems as far as technological problems. I can't help but thinking of the expression pie in the sky when it comes to taking on a project like Mir. Aren't you taking a huge risk here?
We are taking a huge commercial risk. That is what one does very often in an investment like this. We believe firmly that working with our colleagues at RSC Energia, the company that operates the Mir, that there is nothing wrong with the Mir that money cannot fix. That's an extraordinary statement. We all know that the problems on the Mir were because Energia and the Russians ran out of money. And we believe that by creating a financial structure, Western marketing, creating some new commercial markets, we can renovate the Mir, and we believe the renovation of the Mir will be one of the most exciting stories and projects of this decade, if not the century. So we agree, the Mir needs some fixing up, and if we could do that and turn around and own a private space station in space, to me, that's terribly exciting and a wonderful venture.
Well, we have viewers sending in questions, and one of the ways we get them, Mr. Mamba, is by video mail, which people send across the internet to us. And of course, we'd like our viewers to send as many of those in future as possible, so do get used to sending us those. I want you to listen into this. It came in from the iCafe, Internet Cafe in Oklahoma City, and there's a question for you in this.
There seems to be a discussion about keeping it in space as a luxury resort. The pictures I've seen haven't appeared to be very luxurious. I'm wondering what it would take to retrofit that to make it where people would like to go up there and see it.
Well, yes, what exactly are you going to have to do as far as refitting it in general?
As long as I put in the caveat, we're not going to make it a luxurious hotel. I'll say that we estimate it'll be about 150 to 200 million US dollars to get the Mir fixed up, to fix up the equipment, put in state-of-the-art computers, to make sure everything's working just fine. We're sending a crew up at the end of March, which, as I put it, they're going to knock on the door, turn on the lights, see what the condition of the station is, and we'll have a much better estimate after March as to what exactly we have to do. But we just think that, as I said earlier, that the Mir is too valuable, it's too precious, it's too historic a place. We think it's a sin to allow that station just fall into the ocean.
I'm going to put another viewer question to you. We've got on the line from England. Ian, what would you like to ask?
The potential for Mir would appear to be much more from a business sense. In the report shown, they talked about drugs and other things, rather than just setting it up for people to have a cool vacation in space.
Yeah, I think
How realistic is it for you to be able to generate enough money in the short term to meet your goals before Mir starts to deteriorate further?
All right.
Excellent question. What we see is we've raised 20 to 30 million US dollars right now, a very serious beginning. The next stage is we have to attract corporate sponsors worldwide. We're talking to consumer companies around the world, Asia, Europe, and the States. We want them to join with us in this incredible, peaceful, international effort to renovate the Mir. We're looking for other high-net individuals to come in early. And then we believe we can get strategic partners, such as a computer company that may want their computers on the renovated Mir. So we see each stage going along of sponsors, of investors, venture capital firms, and then serious customers of the station.
Well, Jeffrey Mamba, don't go away. We're going to be back with you, asking some more questions with you a little bit later in the program. Right now, it's a short break. When we return, what has living in space taught us and what more can we learn? We'll ask the head of the National Space Society, a non-profit group advocating space exploration. Get your questions and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the program. The Mir space station began its mission with high expectations, but it later suffered a series of malfunctions and has floated empty 200 miles above the Earth since last August. And to take your questions on what we've learned from Mir, we're joined in Washington by Pat Dash. She heads the US-based non-profit group, the National Space Society. Before that, Ms. Dash worked in the Solar System Exploration Division of the US government space agency, NASA. Great to have you with us. A quick question. Mir was supposed to be in service only, like 5 years and lasted 14. So what does it come to represent to the space industry?
To the space industry, I think it's quite an achievement. To the Russians, it's a matter of great pride that it's been up there and that it's performed so well for so long.
Let's get a question in from the chat room, because I know the viewers are lining up with this. So let's get a question that says, basically from the internet. It's up for you here. Let's see if we can get that up for the viewers to see. An internet chat room question. I've got it there. Can Mir be an outpost for building the next space station or a safety refuge? That's from Romania.
Well, it could be the basis for a space station, but obviously it is a space station in itself, and it is not any part of the International Space Station. Could it be a refuge? I think this question maybe is pointing at could it be a safe haven if something happened on the International Space Station that we're building? Well, it's a bit of a push right now. They're not exactly located side by side. But it's something that we could think about for the future, and that's what people like members of the National Space Society think about. They're more interested in whole communities in space and whole business parks than individual isolated stations, and that's what we're moving towards, communities in space.
I've got to bring up that question we've been talking about a little bit as we were leading into the program, saying, what have we learned from Mir? What has Mir taught us as far as what we've done right and what we've done wrong?
There are a bunch of lessons. First of all, it shows that if you really want to build a space station and get it up there, it can be done. We've been wrestling with getting the International Space Station together for way too long. We have had the Mir up there for 14 years, as you said, and that's given us an enormous amount of experience. On the human front, it's told us a lot about long-duration spaceflight. And when people start thinking about going to Mars, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for a human mission to Mars right now, a lot of people forget that one of the most limiting factors is human endurance. We don't actually do too well in space. And I think if Mir Corps can get a few tourists up there who can tell it like it really is, not through the controlled speak of a government agency press outfit, then maybe the public will understand and will push for the research we need. In other terms, you mentioned the contamination. Space is a very, very harsh environment, and certainly Mir has been there way beyond its design life, and it's suffered. And we can learn a lot for the future about how we harden against radiation shielding and how we build stations and any other habitats and elements in space better in the future.
So let's say we could give you an open checkbook. What would you do with Mir if it was your decision?
If it was my decision, I think I would probably be on much the same track as the Mir Corporation. We haven't really exploited the potential for laboratory use and production and manufacturing, partly again for reasons that your short piece mentioned at the beginning of the program. NASA can't often tell people when they can fly, and there are enormous delays in getting an experiment or a piece of equipment on the shuttle. If a commercial entity can tell you when you're going to go and exactly what it's going to cost you, I think we might see manufacturing begin to take off. And then the human element is the big thing in space. That's what captivates the public. And there are surveys have shown that there are thousands of people who would like to go, who would pay not the sort of price that Jeff Mamber's talking about right now, but certainly tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to go. And that market is waiting to break through. So I would take people as well as soon as I could say it was reasonably safe.
Okay, well, let's get a question in from our chat room, people online talking about this. So let's see what we've got up there. What is the possibility of disassembling Mir and bringing it back down to Earth for public display? That's from Germany.
It was going to be deorbited. Disassembling it would be very difficult, partly, I would say, because of all that corrosion that's gone on. I think your options right now are to try and keep it up there and do something with it, which is what the Mir Corps is looking at doing, or deorbiting and moving on and putting all our efforts for now into the International Space Station and seeing what we can learn from that. Sadly, I think it would be enormously costly and maybe technically near impossible to bring it down to exhibit it.
Well, Pat Dash, don't go away. We're going to take a very short break here. And as we go to that, when we return, the future of space exploration. Are there benefits worth the billions of dollars that go into projects like the International Space Station that Pat Dash was talking about? Get your questions ready. We'll get right back to those. Welcome back to the program. We're taking your questions on the future of space exploration and what might become of the Mir space station. We've got two guests taking your questions. In Washington, Pat Dash is the Executive Director of the National Space Society. And in London, we're speaking again with Jeffrey Mamber, the President of Mir Corps. The company is exploring commercial uses for Mir, including turning it into something perhaps in the future of an adventure getaway. So good to have you both with us now on this. Jeffrey Mamber, I should ask you, in having to deal with space issues like this, what kind of security issues are you having to deal with as far as dealing with the Russian authorities and perhaps other countries too?
Well, we don't have that many security issues. We're only leasing the Mir. I shouldn't say only, it's a historic step, but we are leasing the Mir. The Mir is still the property of the Russian government, and Mir Corp is majority owned by the Russian company RSC Energia, which designed, developed, and has operated the Mir. We're hoping that there are as few security issues as possible. The whole reason for this program is peaceful cooperation and the wonder of space, and we hope we don't get bogged down in more mundane issues of people not trusting each other.
Well, Pat Dash, I want to put a question to you that came from Saudi Arabia by internet email. Let's get this one in. It says, if a better version of the Mir space station is built, how much more would it cost than its predecessor?
I couldn't begin to answer that. Jeff might do better because he has worked with the Russians. But Mir is 14 years old, and look at how many billions. What we're looking at a total of 90 billion plus for the International Space Station, which admittedly is a little more ambitious than Mir. But a replacement Mir now, done commercially, what would you say? Jeff, I couldn't put a number on it.
Well, Pat's just described exactly the reason why we're taking the path that we are. We think the Mir in orbit, we'll fix it up. Maybe we'll put another module on it that's $100 million, and I'll give US dollars, and I'll give away some of our corporate secrets here and say, maybe we put a module close to the Mir. We don't have to attach it to the Mir. To us, this is a stepping stone into viewing space construction commercially. There's a lot we can do with Energia, and as Pat said, We've invested billions upon billions of US dollars in ISS, and we're not there yet. The Mir is there. It makes just good common sense to try and do what we're doing.
So, Pat Dash, not meaning to be pessimistic here, but what danger is there that if Mir Corps plans to go more commercial with the station, if they do go wrong, what happens? What harm could it do to the space industry as far as, say, there's a terrible accident, God forbid?
Well, that's a risk that I think the Mir Corps is prepared to take, and that's why they're going up in March to knock on the door and check things out and see how viable this really is when you come home and look in the window. If there were a terrible accident, it would be a setback. But I think, quite honestly, we are on a roll. We see commercial space enterprises taking over low Earth orbit, and it is a dangerous place. There will be accidents, mistakes. We've already seen one business catastrophe with Iridium and their satellite system going pretty much down the drain. Obviously, none of us like to even contemplate loss of human life, but it will happen sometime along the way as more people go into space. And I look to the Mir Corps to just take this one step at a time and do it as safely as they can. If it were to backfire, I think there will be a hiatus, but I think someone else will come back. And I think, ultimately, you will see an international space station getting turned over for commercial use faster than you can believe.
And Jeff Mamber, I've got to ask you, in the past, I guess everyone thinks of the stringent conditions that are needed to get people into space, the kind of training and conditioning they need. How much has that changed, and how much does the way you're taking a commercial path perhaps change the parameters people have to face?
It doesn't change anything. Our majority shareholder is RSC Energia, 18,000 engineers in Russia. They have been responsible for the Mir. They've been responsible for the cargo ship launches, the manned launches. They have been responsible since Sputnik and Yuri Gagarin. We're much like the aviation industry, where you have experts build the planes, and then you have, let's say, Delta or British Airways run the marketing and the financial. So we are not. We at Mir Corp, myself, my CFOs, we're not getting involved in the issues of technical and safety. That belongs with the experts, RSC and
Jeff Mamber, I was actually thinking more in terms of what people as individuals hoping to travel into space might have to face, the amount of training and stuff, how much those parameters might have changed.
We are hopeful we can get it down to maybe 2 months of training. That's just our hope. You have to learn some Russian. You have to learn when to press the buttons. For those who can take the time to do it, we're hoping to beam live images of the beautiful Earth down from the Mir station for cable and internet. We're trying to come up with all sorts of imaginative things to make the Mir closer and part of the Earth. And so we're trying to come up with things, but as Pat's been saying, we all say in the space business, this is dangerous.
Well, Pat Dash, beyond saving Mir, of course, there's the new International Space Station. A lot of problems seem to be coming up as far as getting that on schedule. Is the light on that one starting to fade a little bit?
I don't think the light is fading, but what we're seeing is a new round of problems which unfortunately get somewhat caught up with the presidential election here. We don't really know when the Russians will launch the service module. They've given us a new date this summer. Can we trust them? Who knows? There is this interim control module which the US could launch, and we don't see the Clinton administration stepping up to push the Russians. There's too much involvement or looking over the shoulder of the Russian election. No one wants to rock any boats. So we are into another very sticky phase. And this has been a very long process, and every year of delay costs billions.
So literally a very brief answer from both of you. Pat Dash, starting with you there. Given the opportunity, would you go up to Mir?
Tomorrow.
And Jeffrey?
I asked the Russians, they said, we need you on the ground, but I'd go.
Well, we thank you both of you for joining us and taking our questions here on Q&A, and hopefully we'll get a chance to chat about this sometime again in the future.
Die Raumstation Mir. Seit über 14 Jahren zieht sie ihre Bahnen um die Erde. Als technisches Wunderwerk gerühmt, als fliegender Schrotthaufen verspottet. Für diesen Sommer war ihr Absturz angekündigt. Doch ihr Comeback scheint perfekt. Als Putins starke Bastion im All oder als Filmkulisse für Hollywood. Die Mir-Station. Auf den ersten Blick ein Labyrinth voller Kabel, Schalter, Versorgungsschläuche, Apparaturen. Für bisher 140 Raumfahrer aus 12 Ländern das kosmische Zuhause. Eine intakte Welt für sich, mit allem ausgerüstet, was Menschen heute zum Leben brauchen. Von der Zahnbürste bis zum CD-Spieler, vom Staubsauger bis zum Computer. ...400 Kubikmeter Lebensraum, umhüllt von Metall und Watte. 370 Kilometer über der Erde.
Ich selbst habe sehr viel Mühen in den Bau dieser Station gesteckt. Ich nahm die ersten Jahre an den Starts der einzelnen Segmente teil, fand gemeinsam mit meinen Mitstreitern Lösungen aus vollkommen ausweglosen Lagen. Und daher wäre der Verlust der Raumstation Mir für mich wie der Verlust eines sehr nahen Menschen.
Das Schicksal von Mir stand schon oft auf der Kippe. Ein Brand an Bord im Februar 1997 und 4 Monate später die Kollision mit einem Frachtraumschiff brachte ihr in den Massenmedien den Ruf einer Pannenstation ein. Immer wieder wurde das Ende der Mir angekündigt und immer wieder wurde es dementiert.
Wenn Sie ein älteres Auto haben, dann müssen Sie auch zur Reparatur gehen und dann würden Sie auch von Ihrem Auto nicht von einem Pannenauto reden. Das ist wirklich ungerecht, naiv gedacht, einseitig gedacht, denn die Mir ist eine fantastische Leistung. Die ist ja so riesig groß, dass der Ausfall eines Systems nicht so schwierige Konsequenzen hat, wie es dann eben oft in der Boulevardpresse aussieht.
Die letzten Meldungen über den guten Zustand der Mir und ihre geplante weitere Nutzung für mindestens 2 Jahre haben die Weltöffentlichkeit überrascht. Insider dagegen sind weit weniger erstaunt.
Ich möchte hier sagen, dass die Mir wirklich in einer sehr guten technischen Verfassung ist. Der Ausdruck wunderbar ist vielleicht übertrieben. Aber die Station benötigt keine besondere Instandsetzung mehr. Nur die ganz normalen Wartungsarbeiten, wie sie bei jedem kosmischen Objekt nötig sind und wie bei jedem Auto.
Unspektakulär, aber erfolgreich wurde die Mir in den vergangenen 3 Jahren Schritt für Schritt wieder instand gesetzt und erneuert. Moderne Technik hinter altehrwürdiger Fassade. Im Frühsommer sind die Kosmonauten Alexander Kaleri und Sergei Saljotin von der Mir wieder zurückgekehrt. Ihren Flugauftrag, ein Leck abzudichten und die Station für weitere Besatzungen wieder flott zu machen, haben sie erfüllt. Das Fachurteil nach der glücklichen Landung?
Solange der Flug der Mir keine ernsthafte Gefahr für das kleine Kollektiv von 2 bis 3 Mann an Bord und für die vielen Milliarden Menschen auf der Erde darstellt, denke ich, dass es vernünftig wäre, den Flug der Mir weiter fortzusetzen. So wie die heutige Verfassung der Weltraumstation ist, kann man auf ihr getrost weiterarbeiten.
Судя по нынешнему состоянию станции «Мир», еще можно было бы на ней поработать.
Das Leck in der Mir ist dicht, die Finanzlöcher aber sind geblieben. 250 Millionen Dollar werden jährlich benötigt, um die Station betriebsfähig zu halten. Für die russische Raumfahrtbehörde eine astronomische Summe. Meldungen, die behaupten, die Mir wird als Weltraumhotel ausgebaut, verdichten sich. Eine Aktiengesellschaft bietet bereits freie Zimmer im All mit Frühstück und bestem Ausblick für 40 Millionen Dollar pro Flug und pro Person. Viele hoffen freilich, dass Wladimir Putin, der neue Präsident, die Mir als das letzte Symbol der Weltraummacht Russland retten wird. Vor allem, weil die Russen argwöhnen, bei der neuen internationalen Weltraumstation ISS nur eine Nebenrolle zu spielen, obwohl das Projekt mit russischer Geburtshilfe entstand. Die Computeranimation zeigt bereits die Dimension der neuen Station. Sie ist perfekt. Doch noch immer gibt es nicht einmal verbindliche Verträge zwischen Russen und Amerikanern über die Kompetenzen für ISS.
Und nun auch noch die Russen damit reinzubringen, in deren Wirtschaft es zurzeit auch noch drunter und drüber geht und die selbst eine politische Entwicklung durchlaufen. Und sie jetzt hieran zu beteiligen und zu fordern, dass sie ihre Beiträge pünktlich leisten, das ist ein ungeheures Unterfangen. Und wer denkt, dass ein solches Unternehmen problemlos ablaufen wird, der macht sich doch selbst etwas vor.
Der Streit um den verzögerten Aufbau der ISS und das Festhalten der Russen an ihrer Mir ist mittlerweile ein brisantes Thema im Verhältnis der beiden großen Raumfahrtnationen geworden.
Wer ist der Beste? Das ist die eigentliche Frage. Und nicht, dass von vornherein gesagt wird, ich bin der Beste. Die Konkurrenz dieser beiden Stationen im Kosmos, das ist ein Wettbewerb, so wie im Sport.
Wer das Rennen macht, bleibt vorerst noch offen. Das Schicksal von Mir jedenfalls avanciert bereits zum russischen Hollywood-Stoff. Schauspieler Wladimir Steklov bei Vorbereitungen zum Mir-Flug und ersten Aufnahmen für den Film Die letzte Reise. Die Story handelt von einem Kosmonauten, der sich weigert, die zum Absturz freigegebene Station zu verlassen. Nach Meinung der Fachleute können freilich nur stabile Verhältnisse die Mir auf Dauer retten.
Ich bin vollkommen davon überzeugt, wenn es nicht diese schwere ökonomische Krise gäbe, in die Russland heute geraten ist, dann wäre die Frage nach der Schließung der Raumstation Mir überhaupt nicht erst aufgekommen. Wir stünden fest zu ihrer Weiterbetreibung und es gäbe keinerlei Probleme, so wie es keine Probleme gab, als wir die Raumstation bauten.
Die unendliche Geschichte der Raumstation Mir begann am 19. Februar 1986. Pünktlich zum 27. Parteitag der KPdSU wurde das Kernstück der Superstation ins All geschossen. Ein kosmischer Paukenschlag. Auch ein Erfolg für Michail Gorbatschow, den neuen Hoffnungsträger im Kreml. Aufbruchsstimmung auf der Erde und im Kosmos. Einen Monat später gespanntes Bangen beim Andocken der ersten Besatzung an die Mir. Alles verlief reibungslos. Trotzdem blieben Überraschungen nicht aus.
Das Erste, was mir auffiel, war der Staub, den die Ventilatoren angezogen hatten. Alles sah aus wie Schnee. Wir haben erst einmal die Station sauber machen müssen. Vom ersten Tag an hat mir die Mir gefallen. Allerdings gab es damals nicht einmal ein Radio an Bord. Damit man von dieser absoluten Stille nicht müde wird, haben wir oft und laut gesungen.
Heute gibt es auf der Station alles, was man eben oben braucht. Vor 14 Jahren war die Mir nur ein ziemlich spartanisches Domizil. So starteten ihre beiden ersten Bewohner eine der wohl spektakulärsten Aktionen in der Raumfahrtgeschichte. Sie machten sich von der Mir aus auf den Weg zur Raumstation Salyut 7. Die umkreiste seit 1982 die Erde und steckte noch voller teurer Ausrüstung. Voll beladen flogen Solovjov und Kisim dann wieder zur neuen Station zurück.
Wir haben vieles von der Salyut zur Mir mitgenommen. Videotechnik, wissenschaftliche Geräte zum Experimentieren, vieles andere. Bei meinem Flug zur Mir hatten wir auch ein Foto der Challenger-Besatzung bei, die nur Wochen vorher umgekommen war.
Während die Challenger-Katastrophe im Januar 1986 die USA weit zurückwarf, begannen die Sowjets einen kontinuierlichen Flugverkehr zu ihrer neuen Weltallbasis einzurichten. Mit dem Aufbau der Mir zog die Sowjetraumfahrt in großen Schritten an den USA vorbei. Die Schmach des verlorenen Mondwettlaufs gegen die Amerikaner war damit nach fast 20 Jahren wettgemacht. Die Mir, ursprünglich auch als sowjetischer Vorposten gegen Ronald Reagans SDI-Programm vorgesehen, avancierte nach Gorbatschows Abrüstungsplänen zu einer internationalen Forschungsinsel im All. Über 60 Raumfahrer aus anderen Ländern lebten und arbeiteten auf der sowjetisch-russischen Station, ein einzigartiger Ort. Auch für ganz besondere Raumfahrtmissionen stand die Mir zur Verfügung.
Vom Kosmos sah Afghanistan vollkommen friedlich aus und sehr schön. Von hier oben aus dem All sah man nichts von einem Krieg, sah keine Panzer und keine Flugzeuge.
Fast 10 Jahre rieben sich die Sowjets im Afghanistan-Krieg auf. Aussichtslos wie die Amerikaner in Vietnam während ihrer Apollo-Mondflüge. So bekam der afghanische Jagdflieger Momand Abdullahat einen kosmischen Schnellkursus, um dann im Herbst 1988 als Friedensbotschafter zur Mir zu fliegen.
Es war damals gerade die Zeit, als die UdSSR ihre Politik grundlegend änderte und ihren Truppenabzug aus Afghanistan ankündigte. Mit diesem meinem Flug sollte nun der ganzen Welt gezeigt werden, dass der Krieg in Afghanistan endlich vorbei ist. Meine eigentliche Aufgabe war also die, zu verkünden, ab jetzt wird es Frieden in Afghanistan geben.
Rückzug auf der Erde und erfolgreiche Eroberung des Kosmos. Parallelen der Weltgeschichte. November 1989. Vorbereitung zur Montage eines weiteren Mir-Segmentes, zur gleichen Zeit die Demontage der Berliner Mauer. Anatoli Azibarski, der letzte sowjetische Kosmonautenheld. Unter seinen Händen nahm die Station im Frühjahr 1991 mit nun inzwischen 4 verbundenen Segmenten eine imposante Gestalt an. Ein guter Grund für ihn, Flagge zu zeigen.
Было так, я просто расстегнул скафандр, вот как сейчас расстегиваю рубашку. И из-под своего скафандра достал вот такой вот красивый.
Ich öffnete meinen Bordskafander, so wie ich jetzt mein Hemd öffne. So ungefähr machte ich das damals auch. Aus dem Skafander zog ich dann die schöne Flagge der Sowjetunion. So muss man sie zeigen. Wir hissten diese Flagge im All. Dort oben auf dem Meer war sie dann mehr als ein ganzes Jahr.
Wenn man weiß, unter welchem Missmanagement, also die falschen Management und Konfusion und Durcheinander von Zuständigkeiten, damals auch Sputnik und dann später die Mirs entwickelt, die Salyut und die Mirs entwickelt wurden, von konkurrierenden Ingenieurbüros, die sich gegenseitig versucht haben, Schwierigkeiten zu machen, dann ist es schon ein Wunder, dass überhaupt sowas zustande kam.
Das Khrunichev-Werk in Moskau. Trockendock der großen Raumfahrtwunder. Erst für Mir und heute für Teile der neuen Raumstation ISS. Das Mir-Projekt war wie das amerikanische Mondprogramm eine nationale Aufgabe ersten Ranges. Aus dem Staatsbudget flossen die Mittel. Für Erfolge allerdings war das keine Gewähr.
Als wir die Raumstation dann 1986 ins All schickten, gaben wir alle die Garantie, dass sie nur 3 Jahre fliegen würde. Wir haben wirklich nicht damit gerechnet, dass sie noch sehr viel länger durchhält. Dann, Jahr um Jahr, erlernten wir aber die Techniken zur Reparatur und Wartung der Raumstation. So lösten wir die schwierigsten Probleme.
Seit Mitte der 70er Jahre arbeiteten die sowjetischen Ingenieure sogar an einem neuen Pendelfahrzeug zwischen Erde und Orbit, der Raumfähre Buran. Doch Buran dockte nie an die Mir an. Sie flog nur einmal 1988 unbemannt auf Probe und sehr erfolgreich, um dann dem Rotstift unter Jelzin zum Opfer zu fallen. Anstelle von Buran wird später das Space Shuttle der NASA an Mir festmachen. Sommer 1991. Während die Mir im 5. Jahr ihrer Existenz ruhig ihre Bahnen zog, erreichten die Kosmonauten täglich beunruhigende Meldungen von der Erde. Ihr Dienstherr, der sowjetische Staat, begann sich aufzulösen. Gorbatschow glaubte bis zum Ende alle Fäden in der Hand zu halten. Doch der neue starke Mann stand schon neben ihm auf der politischen Bühne. Boris Jelzin, der zukünftige Präsident Russlands.
Не могу сказать, что чувствовал президент Михаил Сергеевич Горбачев.
Ich kann Ihnen nicht sagen, was Präsident Gorbatschow damals fühlte, als er uns unsere Auszeichnungen am 6. November 1991 im Kreml verlieh. Aber seine Rede war sehr optimistisch. Er sprach davon, dass ein Unionsvertrag unterzeichnet würde und dass es gelingen wird, die UdSSR zu erhalten. Doch nur wenige Wochen später zerfiel die Sowjetunion. Als auf der Erde die rote Flagge schon nicht mehr zu sehen war, sah man sie auf der Mir immer noch.
Der Zerfall der Sowjetunion hatte auch für die Kosmonautik einschneidende Konsequenzen. Baikonur, der Weltraumbahnhof, war plötzlich Ausland. Unabhängige Republik Kasachstan. Russland, ein zahlender Mieter im einst eigenen Haus. Und manche Kosmonauten plagten jetzt vor dem Flug zur Mir völlig ungeahnte Probleme. Staatlich verordnete Bewusstseinsspaltung.
Ich war ja eigentlich Angehöriger der russischen Armee, aber nun auch Kasache. Auf allerhöchster Ebene, auf der Ebene der Staatspräsidenten, musste dann entschieden werden, als was für ein Mensch ich in den Kosmos fliege. Ja, das war dann ein ganz besonderer Flug. Ich als Bürger der Republik Kasachstan fliege gleichzeitig als Militärangehöriger der russischen Armee ins Weltall. Interessant, nicht wahr? Schriftlich habe ich das alles nicht bekommen. Doch trotz dieser Zwiespältigkeit habe ich meine Arbeit dort oben ehrlich geleistet.
Nicht nur die Starts erfolgen nach dem Auseinanderfall der Sowjetunion auf kasachischem Territorium, auch die Landungen. Alles kostet Geld, Miete für Start- und Landeflächen. Kritische Situationen bei leeren Kassen. Streiks, selbst Plünderungen gab es auf dem Kosmodrom Baikonur. Noch ist jeder Mir-Kosmonaut wieder gut auf die Erde zurückgekehrt. Einige allerdings erst nach monatelangen Verspätungen. Das Geld für die Rückflüge fehlte. Kosmonaut, früher ein Traumberuf.
Ich habe gelesen, dass im vorigen Jahr unsere Schüler gefragt wurden, für welche Berufe sie sich besonders interessieren, welche für sie die Traumberufe sein würden. Der Beruf des Kosmonauten landete dabei auf dem letzten oder vielleicht vorletzten Platz. Kosmonauten werden nicht nur schlecht bezahlt, sie erlangen keinen Ruhm mehr bei uns in Russland.
Das seit über 3 Jahrzehnten gehätschelte Kind, die sowjetische Raumfahrt, geriet nun Anfang der 90er Jahre als russische Raumfahrt in eine existenzielle Krise. Trotzdem wurde der Pendeltransport Erde-Mir aufrechterhalten. Doch der Verkehr mit Besatzungen, Wasser, Luft und Lebensmitteln erfolgte nur unregelmäßig. Auf den Ruhm kann man im All verzichten, auf Versorgungsraumschiffe nicht.
Wir investierten zu viel Zeit für Reparaturarbeiten, weil der Nachschub nicht richtig klappte. Die wissenschaftliche Arbeit kam dadurch oft zu kurz. Um die russische Wirtschaft wieder flott zu machen, braucht man vielleicht Jahre. Aber nur eine starke Ökonomie ist eine Garantie dafür, dass man nicht ständig an solche ganz normalen Sachen wie die Frachtraumschiffe denken muss.
Improvisationskunst musste oft die Mängel kompensieren, auch bei der Müllentsorgung. Alexander Serebrov, der erfahrene Bordingenieur, erwies sich als ein besonderer Meister. Erfinderisch verwandelte er heimlich Müll in ein unbekanntes Flugobjekt.
Beim Hinausstoßen der ausgedienten Metallstücke in den Kosmos bestand immer die Gefahr, dass die Mir dabei beschädigt wird. Deshalb bauten wir um den Andockstutzen noch andere Abfallteile und umwickelten das Ganze mit meinem abgetragenen Bordanzug. Ich nannte dieses Geschöpf Inspektor. Er flog so nach vorn geneigt durch das All mit Handschuhen und Helm wie ein Motorradfahrer.
Wochenlang umkreiste dieses UFO die Erde und sorgte für Verblüffung und Staunen im Flugleitzentrum bei Moskau. In dieser Umbruchszeit boten die Russen der Europäischen Raumfahrtagentur ESA und der Deutschen Raumfahrtbehörde eine gute Chance, in das Mir-Programm einzusteigen. Eine Chance vor allem für 4 deutsche Astronauten. Gruppenbild mit Lenin-Büste. Auch Ulf Merbold, der bereits mit dem amerikanischen Shuttle im All war, konnte sich nun mit dem alltäglichen Leben auf einer Orbitalstation bekannt machen. Zum deutschen Rekordflieger mit 183 Mir-Tagen avancierte später Thomas Reiter.
Hello, welcome to my little living room in the module Spectre. I would like to show you.
Ich möchte Ihnen gerne zeigen, welche verschiedenen Dinge es hier gibt. Sie können hier unten meinen Schlafsack sehen. Das ist der Platz, wo ich immer meine Nacht verbringe.
This is the place where I usually spend the night.
Die schönsten Träume auf dem Mir aber kommen den Raumfahrern nicht beim Schlafen, sondern beim Ausblick auf die Erde. Die Ausblicke für das neu gegründete Russland allerdings wurden 1992-93 immer düsterer. Ökonomische und politische Erschütterungen ließen das Land ins Chaos taumeln. Bürgerkrieg drohte. Panzer beschossen das Parlament. In dieser Situation wurden die notwendigen Staatlichgelder für die Mir immer knapper. Zeit für nützliche Allianzen. Herbst 1993 beschlossen Russen und Amerikaner ein gemeinsames Mir-Shuttle-Programm. Nicht nur aus Begeisterung.
Дело в том, что финансовые трудности в нашей стране просто ускорили этот
Die
процесс.
Sache ist die, dass die finanziellen Schwierigkeiten in unserem Land diese Kooperation mit den USA beschleunigte. Die Bedingungen für Russland waren dabei nicht die besten. Unsere Partner wussten, dass die Verwirklichung unserer Kosmos-Programme ohne fremde Hilfe auf längere Zeit sehr kritisch bleiben würde.
Вступать в эту кооперацию. Но мы, несомненно, бы к этому пришли.
Doch die 400 Millionen Dollar aus den USA, die für den Langzeitaufenthalt amerikanischer Astronauten an Bord von Mir gezahlt wurden, waren eine Überlebensspritze. Zugleich beschlossen Amerikaner und Russen nun gemeinsam, eine neue internationale Raumstation zu bauen. Ein großes Vorhaben, von Skepsis begleitet in Moskau und in Washington.
Natürlich ist es auch so, dass diese neue Zusammenarbeit, dass wir seit der Clinton-Administration gemeinsam mit den Russen an der Raumstation arbeiten, die Sache komplizierter macht. Ich meine, wir hatten früher alleine bereits genügend Probleme. Mit der Konstruktion einer Raumstation und mit dem Budget dafür.
Im Sommer 95 der Countdown zum Rendezvous mit Mir.
1 and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission that will herald a new day of international cooperation in space.
Houston now controlling.
Die prekäre Finanzlage der Russen kam der NASA sehr entgegen. Ihr gelang mit den Flügen zur Mir der Seiteneinstieg in die russische Raumfahrt. Alles von der Mir zu lernen, was es zu lernen gab. Anstatt des Buran dockte nun eine US-Raumfähre an die Mir an. Die einstigen Kontrahenten als Gäste mit an Bord. Die Zeit des Kalten Krieges schien nun auch im All vorbei. »29. Juni 1995. Wieder ein historischer Händedruck. 20 Jahre nach dem legendären Apollo-Soyuz-Flug begrüßten sich erstmals wieder Russen und Amerikaner im All. Ein schwereloses Gruppenbild. Der nächste Flug zur Mir im November 1995 war fast schon Routine. Trotzdem blieb der erste Eindruck von der Raumstation für alle immer ein Erlebnis besonderer Art.
Wir sahen das, was die meisten sahen, die sich an die Raumstation annäherten. Und das war die enorme Größe der Raumstation Mir, die vielen verbundenen Module und die Sonnensegel. Die Sonnensegel streckten sich in alle Richtungen aus, um die Sonne einzufangen. Und es erschien uns, als ob sie sich vielleicht auch nach uns ausstreckten, um uns zu fangen. Bei der Annäherung an die Station mussten wir außerordentlich vorsichtig zu Werke gehen. Die Abstände waren sehr knapp, um beim Ankoppeln noch erfolgreich zu sein.
Contact, capture.
Die ankommenden Amerikaner erwartete in der Mir ein reges Treiben. Stationsalltag, täglicher Sport, Wartungsarbeiten, wissenschaftliche Experimente. Auf den ersten Blick ein ziemlich heilloses Durcheinander.
Es ist organisierte Wissenschaft, auch wenn es vielleicht für die Außenwelt unorganisiert aussieht. Auf der Mir sind so viele Experimente in Betrieb und hier haben so viele Menschen für so lange Zeit gelebt, dass nicht nur auf den Tischen und Bücherregalen Ausrüstungen stehen, sondern auch an den Wänden, an der Decke, auf dem Boden. Man muss sich erst daran gewöhnen. Wenn Sie aber eine Weile im Weltraum gelebt haben, dann stört Sie diese Art der Lagerung nicht mehr.
storage methods.
Das geordnete Durcheinander ist vor allem eine Folge der Schwerelosigkeit. Ein existenzielles Problem, das bisher nur in Science-Fiction-Filmen überwunden ist. Die Raumstation hier eine riesige Zentrifuge, ein Wohnrad, dessen langsame Rotation Schwerkraft erzeugt. In dem sowjetischen Film von 1957 ist das Leben im All eine ganz genaue Kopie des Lebens auf der Erde. Keine Spur von den Schwierigkeiten, die der Mensch mit der Schwerelosigkeit hat. Auf der Mir aber spürt man sie noch, die unerträgliche Leichtigkeit des kosmischen Seins. Schwerelos, ein schweres Los.
Bei der Schwerelosigkeit im Orbit steigt das ganze Blut nach oben in den Kopf. Das ist ein sehr unangenehmes Gefühl. Aber dank diesem Spezialanzug kann man das Blut nach unten ziehen mit Unterdruck. So werden die Blutgefäße trainiert. Das Gefühl, das man dabei hat, ist sehr angenehm. Man denkt an die Erde und hat diese Frische im Kopf.
Valeri Poljakow, der berühmteste Weltraumarzt und seine Vakuumhose. Ein Geniestreich der Raumfahrtmedizin. Das wichtigste Experiment im All ist der monatelange Aufenthalt auf der Mir selbst. Denn eigentlich ist der Mensch für ein Leben im Kosmos nicht geboren.
Der Kosmonaut ist auf der Station ganz alleine. Er hat nur seine Erfahrungen. Es gibt sehr viele Situationen im All, die nicht vorauszusehen sind. Aber wir gewinnen damit wichtige Erkenntnisse für die Zukunft. Diese Erfahrungen sind für die internationale Station, für die zukünftigen Flüge zum Mars sehr wichtig. Wir müssen einfach die Möglichkeiten des Menschen und auch der Technik gut kennen.
Poljakow selbst flog fast 700 Tage mit der Mir. Eine Zeitreise. Einmal zum Mars und zurück. Pionierarbeit für einen zukünftigen Flug zum roten Planeten. Doch nicht nur Studien für Langzeitflüge, mehr als 23.000 verschiedene Experimente gab es bisher auf der Mir. Neben der Arbeit Zeit zum Entspannen. Einige Kosmonauten allerdings hatten auch schwer einzuhaltende Verpflichtungen.
Da ich Musulmanin bin, fragte mich ein Journalist, ob ich im All 5-mal am Tag unser heiliges Gebet, das Namas, gelesen hätte. Wenn ich so oft gebetet hätte, wäre keine Zeit mehr zum Arbeiten geblieben. Denn 5-mal beten, das sind 50 Minuten. Dabei dauert ein Flug um die Erde nur knapp 90 Minuten.
Was für die einen das Gebet ist, ist für die Russen die Sauna. Ohne Kompromisse, mit Reisig und mit kalter Dusche.
I'd like to see Jim Swaggart lay his hands on Tammy Baker. But I love to see them Dolly Parton's tits. Yeah, I love to see them Dolly Parton's tits.
Deftige Country-Romantik, nicht am Lagerfeuer, sondern im All. Kosmische Cowboys. Bei allem Stress in dem beengten Leben auch heitere Töne an Bord.
I'm just thinking about Dolly's rockets. Here I come again, my fantasy. Yeah, there I go again, my fantasy.
Mir ist eigentlich die Station, die an deren Entwicklung in den letzten Monaten wir ja nun auch Hand anlegen durften und am Bordleben durften wir teilnehmen. Sie ist also für uns die wichtigste russische Raumstation, weil sie uns ein Wissen, ein Know-how gibt, das wir selber nicht besessen haben.
Nicht alle Gefahren im All sind vorhersehbar, aber viele Extremsituationen wurden vorher simuliert und Besatzungen darauf vorbereitet. Bilder aus einem Lehrfilm. Kosmonauten agieren in einer havarierten Raumstation. 23. Februar 97, der Ernstfall. Ein Sauerstoffgenerator beginnt zu brennen. Die Besatzung greift nach Gasmaske und Feuerlöscher. 14 Minuten später ist der Schreck vorbei. Der ätzende Geruch bleibt noch Tage. Dann, nur 4 Monate nach dem Brand, die Katastrophe. Wie geplant nähert sich ein Progress-Transporter der Mir, um ein neues Andockverfahren auszuprobieren. Das sich schnell nähernde Raumschiff kann nicht abgebremst werden, so kommt es zum Crash. Ein Sonnensegel wird gerammt. Schriller Daueralarm ertönt. Ein Leck in der Außenhaut. Lebensgefahr.
Es musste schnell gehandelt werden. Und wir haben auch schnell reagiert. Schon nach 10 Minuten konnten wir die Luke zum beschädigten Teil dicht machen. Der Luftdruck war natürlich stark gefallen. Aber diese Gefahr, die Station aufgeben und verlassen zu müssen, die gab es dann nicht mehr. Die Zusammenarbeit der ganzen Mannschaft klappte wirklich perfekt.
Auf den Monitoren im Flugleitzentrum in Moskau zeigte sich ein erschreckendes Bild. Sämtliche Kabel zum beschädigten Modul mussten, um die Luke zu schließen, gekappt werden. Ratlosigkeit bei den Experten. Einige gaben der Besatzung die Schuld, für andere waren sie Helden, die Retter der Mir. Öffentlich und vorschnell urteilte und verurteilte Boris Jelzin, es liegt nicht an der Technik, es ist der menschliche Faktor. Eigentlich möchte ich selbst hochfliegen, um nach dem Rechten zu schauen. Eine Zeit lang standen die Kosmonauten nur als Sündenböcke da. Erst Monate nach ihrer Landung zeichnete der Präsident die Unglücksbesatzung im Kreml aus. Durch diese beiden Vorfälle auf der Mir, die US-Astronauten miterlebten, geriet die NASA unter starken Druck. Die Kritiker in Washington forderten den Abbruch der Zusammenarbeit mit den Russen.
Soll man sich etwa jedes Mal, wenn es Probleme gibt, von seinen neuen Partnern abwenden? Oder erhebt man sich über das alles und analysiert das Problem, findet Lösungswege, macht weiter mit der großen Vision? Nun sagen einige Leute, Amerika hätte $400 Millionen an die Russen verschenkt.
Diese Dinge, die da passieren, könnten wir nicht auf der Erde simulieren. Und das Wissen, was wir dadurch erhalten, ist für uns ein Gottesgeschenk. Deswegen wird es auch weitergeführt, obwohl das sicherlich ärgerlich ist, wenn Dinge da an Bord von Mir passieren, nur weil es eben eine alte Station ist, die zum Teil auch riskant sind. Aber was man da lernt, das kann man überhaupt nicht anders woher bekommen oder auch nicht bezahlen.
Das Programm ging weiter. Letztlich schien die Rendite für die Amerikaner trotz aller Risiken zu stimmen. Und für sie war klar, dass nach dem letzten Shuttle-Rendezvous die Tage der Mir ohnehin gezählt sein würden. Im Juni 1998 endete mit der 9. Shuttle-Dockung an die Mir ein für beide Seiten nützliches Programm. Zum Abschied ein Geschenk, ein Schraubenschlüssel für den gemeinsamen Zusammenbau der neuen internationalen Station.
Es war eine schöne Zeit dort oben mit den Amerikanern. Die Besatzung des Shuttle war sehr traurig, dass dieser Flug nun der letzte sein sollte. Als ich nach der Verabschiedung der Amerikaner die Verbindungsluke zwischen mir und Shuttle für immer zuschließen musste, hatte ich natürlich auch so ein trauriges Gefühl. Jetzt ist dort ein Lager. Es gibt keinen Durchgang mehr.
Mit dem Ablegen des US-Shuttle Atlantis ging die erfolgreiche Präsenz der Amerikaner auf der Mir zu Ende. 44 US-Astronauten besuchten die Raumstation. Sehr viel mehr Russen waren auch nicht oben.
Main gear touchdown. Jet now deploying the drag chute.
In Cape Kennedy erhielt dann NASA-Chef Goldwyn das letzte Geschenk von der Mir, den symbolischen Schraubenschlüssel für den Zusammenbau der ISS. Vom Trick zur Wirklichkeit. Mittlerweile sind die ersten beiden von später 27 Teilen der neuen internationalen Raumstation zusammenmontiert worden. Eines wurde in Russland gebaut, das andere in den USA. Das dritte Modul, das Service-Modul Zvezda, stammt wieder aus dem Moskauer Khrunichev-Werk. Die erste ISS-Besatzung beim Landetraining. Doch die Bilder trügen. Noch steht ihr Starttermin nicht fest. Vorwürfe der Amerikaner werden laut, dass sich die Russen nur halbherzig am ISS-Projekt engagieren, zu viel Geld in die Mir stecken. Aber die Russen betrachten Mir als eine innere Angelegenheit. Mit dem neuen Mann am Kreml, Wladimir Putin, hat ihr Weiterleben jetzt einen starken Fürsprecher bekommen. Schon Wochen vor seiner Inthronisation versprach er, alle Finanzprobleme der Mir zu lösen. Der neue Präsident verordnet eine Rückbesinnung auf die alte sowjetische Raumfahrttradition. Der Stolz auf die eigenen Leistungen als ein Stück des neuen russischen Selbstbewusstseins. Ansichten, die Hoffnungen produzieren, besonders bei den Kosmonauten.
Ich träumte davon, dass mich plötzlich während meiner Arbeit im Raumfahrtzentrum Energia ein überraschender Anruf erreicht. Am Telefon sagte man mir, ich müsse ganz kurzfristig, innerhalb einer Woche, wieder in den Kosmos fliegen, wieder zu meiner Station. Bis jetzt war es nur ein Traum.
Schwerelos noch immer. Altersschwach noch nicht. Die legendäre Raumstation zieht weiter ihre Bahnen um die Erde, wartet schon auf ihre nächsten Gäste. Die Mir. Eine unendliche Geschichte